a captivating narrative unfolds, transporting observers into the heart of ancient Greece and its enduring tales. This exploration delves into a world where myth and history intertwine, promising insights into the fundamental questions of existence. The scene is set on a balmy evening 2.5 millennia ago, amidst the sun-drenched hills of ancient Corinth. A gentle Mediterranean breeze carried the unmistakable fragrance of olive groves, mingling with the faint murmur of waves caressing distant rocky shores. Onlookers are drawn towards the magnificent palace of King Sisyphus, unaware that this monarch's destiny would soon be etched into legend for an achievement both profoundly extraordinary and eternally arduous. Before the arduous, eternal task of pushing a colossal boulder up an endless incline, King Sisyphus presided over the flourishing city of Corinth, very much alive and at the height of his power. His predicament, however, was one that many rulers might paradoxically desire, an intellect so sharp it bordered on hubris. Sisyphus had unearthed a profound secret, a truth traditionally withheld from the mortal realm. He possessed the audacious knowledge of how to circumvent the very grasp of death itself. During Sisyphus's prosperous reign, the citizens of Corinth experienced a vibrant daily existence. Each dawn heralded the familiar sounds of merchants meticulously arranging their wares in the bustling agora, the city's central marketplace. The enticing aroma of freshly baked bread perpetually intermingled with the invigorating, salty essence carried in from the harbor. Daily, vessels laden with diverse goods anchored in the port, delivering exquisite pottery from Athens, luxurious silks from exotic, distant lands, and captivating narratives from intrepid travelers who had traversed the vast expanse of the known world. King Sisyphus was widely celebrated, and sometimes secretly feared, for 3 distinct attributes. Foremost among them was his extraordinary intellect, a mind so exceptionally cunning that hushed conversations suggested he possessed the capacity to outmaneuver even the Olympian deities. Secondly, his astute leadership had transformed Corinth into an unparalleled bastion of prosperity, arguably the wealthiest city-state across the entirety of Greece. And thirdly, while his character was undeniably marked by a certain duplicity, his deceptive maneuvers often, remarkably, redounded to the benefit of his populace, ensuring that any murmurs of discontent remained largely subdued. In the early hours, Sisyphus could often be observed traversing the city's thoroughfares with a deliberate, unhurried gait. Unlike many monarchs, he never appeared to be in haste. Instead, his gaze meticulously absorbed every detail of his surroundings, the precise arrangement of merchants' wares, the intricate process of loading cargo onto ships at the bustling harbor, and the preferred routes chosen by various travelers. His intellect was in perpetual motion, ceaselessly contemplating, ceaselessly strategizing. His formidable mind operated with the precision of a spider meticulously weaving an intricate, invisible web, effortlessly connecting disparate details that eluded the notice of ordinary individuals. Then, on one unforgettable morning, an extraordinary event pierced the routine of daily life. As citizens engaged in their customary transactions, perhaps selecting olives from a favored merchant, a figure cloaked in dark garments was observed moving silently through the marketplace. This individual neither sought goods nor engaged in conversation. His sole occupation appeared to be observation. An unsettling aura surrounded him, compelling people to instinctively make way, a subconscious deference to an unseen power. Shadows seemed to cling to his form, and the lively cacophony of market chatter inexplicably hushed in his immediate vicinity. This enigmatic stranger was none other than Thanatos, the very embodiment of death. His presence in Corinth was dictated by official, grim duty. A soul was destined to depart the mortal coil that very day, and Thanatos had arrived to claim it. The profound irony, and indeed the central challenge, lay in the identity of his appointed target, King Sisyphus himself. Yet Sisyphus, with his characteristic foresight and unparalleled cunning, had not been caught unawares. He had, in fact, been anticipating this fateful visitation for a considerable period. His incredibly sharp intellect allowed him to discern subtle patterns that eluded all others, to observe intricate details concerning cosmic timing and the inexorable unfolding of predestined events. These astute observations had led him to a chilling suspicion. His appointed time, his moment of reckoning, was rapidly approaching. Thus, when Thanatos materialized within the palace walls that very evening, Sisyphus extended a greeting so unexpectedly warm and cordial, it was as if he were welcoming a long-lost companion. "Welcome, welcome," the king effused, gesturing towards the most exquisite wine and the most sumptuously cushioned chair. "You must be weary from your extensive journey. I implore you, please, take a seat and find some much-deserved repose." Such an invitation to leisurely conversation was utterly unprecedented for Thanatos. Mortals typically reacted to his presence with either abject terror, fleeing in desperate screams, or with a resigned, silent acceptance of their inevitable destiny. This remarkably friendly reception was entirely unforeseen, and Thanatos, despite his formidable role as death incarnate, found himself intrigued, his curiosity piqued by the unexpected turn this encounter was taking. As Thanatos settled into the comfortable chair, he remarked, "I presume you are fully aware of the purpose of my visit." He had to concede. The vintage Sisyphus offered was indeed of exceptional quality, a rare pleasure in his line of work. "Oh, absolutely," Sisyphus responded, his tone brimming with feigned admiration. "And I must confess, I am profoundly impressed by the sheer artistry of your operations. The impeccable precision, the flawless timing, the masterful way you maintain cosmic equilibrium. It is truly remarkable." Coordinating such an immense tapestry of transitions must be an undertaking of unimaginable complexity. Thanatos, surprisingly, found himself nodding in agreement. His duties were indeed intricate, demanding a degree of skill and vigilance that went largely unacknowledged by the living. It was a rare occurrence for anyone to genuinely appreciate the profound complexities of his monumental task. He took another deliberate sip of the fine wine, allowing the conversation to continue its unexpected course. "But do enlighten me," Sisyphus pressed on, his voice laced with an insatiable, seemingly innocent curiosity. "How precisely does your mechanism function? I have always harbored a profound fascination for ingenious contraptions. Consider, for example, these chains." He indicated a magnificent set of intricately crafted silver chains adorning a nearby wall. The artisan who forged them boasts of their absolute indestructibility. Yet I have often pondered, how could one truly verify such an extraordinary assertion? Purely out of professional interest, you comprehend. It was at this pivotal juncture that Sisyphus's legendary reputation for unparalleled cunning truly manifested its brilliance. Through a masterful blend of feigned intellectual curiosity, calculated flattery, and the intoxicating influence of the superb vintage, he ingeniously persuaded Thanatos to don the formidable chains, ostensibly merely to ascertain their purported strength. The instant those silver links clicked irrevocably shut around Thanatos's wrists, the very fabric of existence was irrevocably altered. Death itself, the inescapable force, now sat ensnared within Sisyphus's opulent palace, confined to a plush chair, wearing an expression of profound, if immortal, embarrassment. This situation is, to say the least, rather inconvenient, Thanatos conceded with a sigh. Perhaps for you, Sisyphus retorted, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. For my purposes, however, it proves remarkably advantageous. Thus commenced an era utterly unprecedented, marking the strangest chapter in the annals of both Corinth and the entire known world. With death now held captive, secured by unbreakable chains within the king's private chambers, mortality itself ceased to function. No one could perish, not within the bustling walls of Corinth, nor in any corner of the globe. The elderly, instead of finding their peaceful repose, simply endured, their years accumulating without end. Warriors engaged in far-flung conflicts sustained mortal injuries, yet inexplicably continued to wage battle, their lives refusing to relinquish their hold. Gradually, a profound and unsettling realization dawned upon humanity. A fundamental, immutable aspect of the natural order had been irrevocably overturned. For King Sisyphus, this improbable triumph was the zenith of his ambitions. He had, against all odds, achieved the deepest, most forbidden desire of every mortal heart. He had vanquished death itself. His days were now spent in serene dominion over Corinth, punctuated by lavish, extended dinners shared with his beloved wife, Merope, and tranquil evenings spent observing the glorious sunsets from his private palace balcony. He believed he had won the ultimate cosmic game, securing an eternal victory. However, the sweet taste of victory does not always linger as delightfully as anticipated. After the passage of several weeks, a subtle disquiet began to gnaw at Sisyphus. He observed that Thanatos, despite his ignominious captivity, displayed no discernible signs of distress or anger regarding his predicament. On the contrary, the embodiment of mortality appeared almost entertained. "Are you thoroughly enjoying your triumph?" Thanatos inquired one evening, his tone betraying a knowing quality. "Indeed, with immense satisfaction," Sisyphus confidently affirmed. Yet, a subtle nuance in Thanatos's voice instilled a nascent unease within the king. "Excellent, excellent," Thanatos continued, his smile deepening with a chilling prescience. "I sincerely hope you savor every moment, for you must surely comprehend that in due course, my esteemed colleagues will inevitably discern my prolonged absence from my appointed duties, and when that realization dawns upon them." Thanatos allowed his words to trail off, leaving the unspoken implications to hang heavy in the air, punctuated by his ominous, knowing smile. It was in that pregnant silence that Sisyphus's triumphant facade began to crack, the chilling realization dawning upon him that while he had secured a single, remarkable victory, the overarching war was far from won. The Olympian gods, it became clear, possessed a profound aversion to having their intricate, fundamental cosmic order disrupted, even by the most ingenious of mortal monarchs. Nevertheless, for the present moment, Sisyphus had undeniably achieved the utterly impossible. He sat enthroned in his resplendent palace, vibrantly alive, having audacious circumvented the very architect of mortality. The fading evening light cascaded through the windows, bathing the grand chambers in a soft, ethereal gold. In the distance, the silhouettes of ships navigated back to the harbor, their sails billowing gently in the day's final breeze. And in his comfortable, albeit confining chair, Thanatos waited with an unnerving patience, fully aware that all mortal triumphs are inherently ephemeral, and that the true, enduring saga of Sisyphus had only just commenced its inexorable unfolding. 3 weeks after Thanatos's audacious confinement within the Corinthian palace, the initial surge of exhilaration surrounding the impossible feat had transmuted into a far more unsettling reality. The world had become a peculiar place where the most inherent, undeniable aspect of existence had simply ceased. Each morning dawned upon a new, bewildering reality, one where the cosmic force of death had inexplicably embarked upon an unscheduled, indefinite hiatus. Initially, the profound implications of this cosmic disruption largely went unremarked. After all, the arrival of death is not a daily occurrence for every individual. However, with the relentless march of days, a slow, insidious realization began to pervade the collective consciousness. An immutable cornerstone of their reality had irrevocably changed. Consider the aged proprietor of the local pottery shop, who for months had been plagued by a debilitating cough. He continued to cough, yet his condition, defying all natural progression, never deteriorated further. Or the woman who, merely a week prior, had plummeted from her rooftop, sustaining injuries that by all medical understanding should have been fatal. She now ambled about, her broken bones still mending, merely grumbling about the persistent inconvenience rather than succumbing to her fate. One might initially perceive this unprecedented state of affairs as a wondrous blessing, an end to sorrow, to the anguish of loss, to the painful farewells to cherished loved ones. Yet, as the sun rose and set over the prolonged absence of Thanatos, a stark and unsettling truth began to emerge. Immortality, it became chillingly clear, was not the unalloyed gift it first appeared to be. Within the confines of a modest dwelling near the vibrant Corinthian marketplace, the familiar morning symphony would commence, the creak of merchants' stalls being erected, the joyful clamor of children at play in the winding streets, and the perpetual soothing murmur of waves against the distant harbor. On the surface, all appeared to retain its customary rhythm. However, upon venturing out to procure the day's bread from the local baker, an unsettling peculiarity would inevitably present itself. The baker's venerable grandfather, who for many months had been confined to his sickbed, was now inexplicably assisting in the bustling shop. His movements were painfully slow, his breathing audibly labored, and his eyes held a profound weariness that transcended the deepest sleep. He toiled on, not out of choice, but because in this new reality he simply lacked the capacity to die. A concerned citizen might inquire of the baker, "How is your grandfather faring today?" The baker, casting a sorrowful glance towards the ancient figure, would simply offer a helpless shrug. "He ought to have found his peaceful repose weeks ago," the baker would lament. "Now, he is merely trapped. We are at a loss as to how to alleviate his plight. He endures constant pain, yet he is cruelly denied the solace of rest." This bleak reality unveiled the profound, agonizing shadow cast by Sisyphus's audacious triumph. In the absence of death, suffering was not eradicated. Instead, it became an unending torment, a perpetual state of agony. The very natural rhythm of existence, which gracefully allowed the aged to find their final rest and yield their place to the burgeoning generations, had been violently disrupted, replaced by an agonizing, stagnant perpetuity. Within the regal confines of his citadel, King Sisyphus partook in his customary morning vintage, sharing the occasion with Thanatos, who, despite persisting in his bound state, exhibited an unexpected loquaciousness. An unconventional custom had gradually taken root between them over the preceding weeks. It was Sisyphus's regular practice to supply Thanatos with provisions and libations, and together they engaged in profound deliberations spanning philosophical tenets, governmental affairs, and the intricate workings of human demise. "Inquire I must," King Sisyphus articulated, as he meticulously decanted the rich liquid into 2 goblets for their shared enjoyment. "Does monotony not often beset your existence? The perpetual task of harvesting souls, an unending cycle performed day after day, stretching across countless centuries, surely presents a challenge to perpetual engagement." The personification of demise pondered this inquiry, his gaze drifting to scrutinize the intricate shackles restraining him. They were, he had to admit, undeniably possessed of exquisite artistry. "One might find the reality rather astonishing," Thanatos declared. "Every individual confronts their ultimate cessation of life in a distinct manner. Some fiercely resist, others embrace their fate with resignation, while still others endeavor to negotiate their passage. It proves to be a remarkably diverse and ever-changing occupation." "And in the present circumstance, what then?" Sisyphus pressed, his curiosity piqued. "Currently," Thanatos responded, "my engagement involves partaking of vintage with an exceptionally astute monarch, all while observing the gradual dawning of comprehension across the mortal realm, that perhaps the cessation of life is not, in fact, the unmitigated horror it has long been perceived to be." Verily, dispatches and tidings were commencing their journey to Corinth from the far-flung reaches of the Hellenic lands. A breathless courier recently delivered communiques, the contents of which instilled a profound disquietude within all who heard them. Consider the distressing account from Athens, where an elderly matriarch had languished beneath the debris of a collapsed edifice for an entire week, miraculously persisting in life, despite sustaining wounds that should unequivocally have proven fatal. Meanwhile, in the martial city-state of Sparta, fierce engagements unfolded where combatants endured injuries universally deemed fatal, yet inexplicably, none succumbed to their grievous afflictions. The fields of conflict, once sites of inevitable demise, now teemed with warriors whose bodies bore the marks of sword cuts and spear thrusts that, under any normal circumstance, would have instantly claimed their lives, yet they continued to clash with undiminished vigor. The very fabric of existence, the established cosmic equilibrium, was demonstrably unraveling, thereby engendering a multitude of unforeseen complications and profound societal disturbances that no mortal mind had ever conceived. However, the true genesis of widespread calamity coincided with the intelligence finally ascending to the lofty heights of Mount Olympus. The Olympian deities, it must be understood, had been profoundly engrossed in their own celestial concerns and intricate divine machinations, and consequently had not instantly perceived that the meticulously orchestrated cosmic framework had, in fact, entirely ceased its operation. Nevertheless, in due course, Hades, the formidable sovereign of the underworld, became acutely aware that the constant influx of newly departed souls had inexplicably dwindled to nothing for a considerable duration. Initially, his grim perception led him to surmise a mere lull in the processing of the deceased. He mused that perhaps an unprecedented era of tranquility and robust well-being had settled upon the mortal realm. Yet, as mere days transmuted into protracted weeks without the customary arrival of any new spirits, his suspicions deepened, compelling him to initiate a thorough inquiry. And it was precisely upon his shocking revelation that Thanatos, the very embodiment of death, was conspicuously absent from his appointed duties, that the unfolding narrative truly began to acquire an intriguing and perilous complexity. Meanwhile, within the bustling city of Corinth, the populace proceeded with their quotidian affairs when a chilling phenomenon seized their collective attention, instilling a profound dread. The azure firmament, hitherto unblemished and luminous, abruptly plunged into an ominous gloom, a darkening not attributable to nascent storm clouds, but rather to an intangible yet palpable atmospheric shift. Indeed, the very ether appeared to congeal, heavy with the unmistakable manifestation of celestial wrath and indignation. King Sisyphus, ensconced within his palatial abode, likewise perceived this disquieting alteration. He remained seated opposite Thanatos, partaking in what had evolved into their established afternoon vintage ritual, when, quite distinctly, the ambient temperature within the chamber plummeted several degrees, signaling an imminent, powerful presence. "I surmise," Thanatos remarked with an almost unsettling placidity, "that the entity approaching would be none other than Ares." Sisyphus endeavored to maintain an unwavering cadence in his speech. "The formidable deity of martial conflict," he articulated. "His divine indignation is undoubtedly inflamed by the recent, unprecedented disruptions plaguing the world's battlegrounds. Indeed, Hades himself dispatched this formidable Olympian to conduct a thorough inquiry into the matter." As if in immediate corroboration, the grand doors of the palace, without the slightest human touch or mechanical impetus, violently flung themselves inward. Into the opulent chamber strode Ares, the very embodiment of belligerence and divine conflict, his demeanor radiating an unmistakable and profound displeasure. His imposing figure was exceptionally tall, his frame massively broad-shouldered, clad in formidable armor crafted from an unknown, dark metal that appeared to absorb all ambient light, rather than reflecting its gleam. From beneath his helmet, his eyes blazed with an infernal intensity, mirroring the accumulated fury and unyielding aggression of 1,000 victorious battles. "What egregious transgression have you perpetrated?" he thundered, his voice reverberating with divine authority. Sisyphus, commendably, did not immediately succumb to an understandable state of alarm or terror. He rose deliberately from his seat, executed a deferential bow, and with an inviting sweep of his arm, indicated an available chair. "Lord Ares," he began, his tone surprisingly composed, "a most distinguished welcome to my humble palace. Might I offer you a refreshing goblet of our finest vintage?" Ares's blazing gaze swept from the still shackled form of Thanatos to the audacious king, then returned, incredulous, to the personification of mortality. "Are you, in all earnestness, extending an offer of libations?" the war god questioned, his voice laced with disbelief, whilst simultaneously retaining the very essence of death as your captive. Indeed, Sisyphus responded with an air of disarming reasonableness. It appeared to be the appropriate and courteous course of action under the circumstances, even when entertaining a divine guest. For a fleeting moment, Ares found himself utterly dumbfounded by the sheer, unmitigated audacity encapsulated within Sisyphus's reply, rendering him momentarily speechless. Before him stood a mere mortal monarch, who had somehow managed to ensnare death incarnate, thereby plunging the meticulously balanced cosmic order into profound disarray, and yet was now extending an invitation for refreshments, as if presiding over a casual social call. However, the formidable war god swiftly regained his formidable composure. With a seemingly nonchalant flick of his wrist, a motion imbued with the raw, irresistible might of divine power, he utterly annihilated the formidable chains binding Thanatos. The shattered silver links, fragmented into countless pieces, cascaded across the polished floor, scattering with the ephemeral grace of droplets of water upon impact. "When I express my gratitude," Thanatos articulated, gracefully extending his limbs and rotating his shoulders, for those restraints had indeed become somewhat constricting and quite irksome. Sisyphus observed, with an undeniable pang of disappointment, his carefully orchestrated triumph dissipate instantaneously before his very gaze. Yet even in this moment of apparent defeat, confronted by the raw, unbridled fury of the Olympian deities, his cunning intellect remained ceaselessly active. For Sisyphus, it must be noted, was never truly at an end with his intricate machinations and elaborate stratagems. "Before you escort me to the realm of the departed," he addressed Thanatos, his tone remarkably calm, "might I humbly request the indulgence of one minor boon?" Both divine beings regarded him with undisguised astonishment. The vast majority of mortals, when brought face to face with the inevitable embrace of death following such an egregious and audacious deception, typically resorted to desperate pleas for clemency or frantic attempts at escape. They certainly did not presume to solicit concessions or special dispensations. "What manner of concession do you seek?" inquired Thanatos, a flicker of involuntary curiosity momentarily overriding his usual solemnity, for even death found the king's composure perplexing. It was at this precise juncture that Sisyphus prepared to unleash his subsequent, meticulously devised stratagem, a cunning snare for the unwary. For even in the undeniable aftermath of losing the current engagement, his remarkably prescient mind was already calculating and envisioning outcomes several steps into the future, anticipating every countermove and potential pitfall. The grand, intricate game of wits, from his perspective, was unequivocally far from its ultimate conclusion, merely entering a new, more complex phase. As the twilight hues descended gently upon the city of Corinth, and the established natural order of existence commenced its inexorable reassertion across the globe, individuals in every corner of the world perceived a profound, yet subtle alteration in the very fabric of reality. The venerable patriarch of the old potter's lineage, after an unnatural prolongation of life, at last closed his weary eyes and peacefully embraced the eternal slumber he had been denied. The grievously wounded combatants on distant, blood-soaked battlefields finally received the profound and much-needed repose that had been cruelly withheld from them. The unfortunate woman, agonizingly pinned beneath the ruins of the collapsed Athenian structure, was at last delivered from her prolonged and unbearable suffering. Death, The indispensable and inevitable cessation had thus been reinstated into the mortal world, proving itself as fundamental and essential as the very act of respiration. And yet, despite this restoration, one could not shake the pervasive intuition that Sisyphus's extraordinary narrative concerning his entanglement with death was far from its denouement. For indeed, a mortal of such unparalleled cunning, one who possessed the sheer ingenuity to shackle the very embodiment of mortality, was undoubtedly equipped with a repertoire of stratagems far exceeding a single audacious maneuver. The specific concession Sisyphus had so boldly solicited, precisely at the moment Thanatos prepared to escort him to the spectral realm, was poised to fundamentally redefine all prevailing understanding concerning the wily monarch of Corinth. Imagine, if you will, the scene unfolding within the palace courtyard on the subsequent morning. The atmosphere was remarkably crisp, imbued with the fragrant essence of flourishing olive groves and the subtle saline tang carried inland from the distant sea. One might reasonably anticipate discovering the royal residence shrouded in profound mourning, its grand facades draped in somber black fabrics, with the household staff openly lamenting the demise of their sovereign. Instead, what greeted the observer was a spectacle considerably more perplexing and utterly unexpected. The palace presented an aspect of complete and utter normalcy. There were no visible signs of ceremonial mourning attire, no indications of impending funeral preparations, and conspicuously absent was any display of a grief-stricken queen. Indeed, Queen Merope herself was observed attending to her customary daily duties, conducting her affairs with the composed demeanor of one entirely untouched by recent extraordinary events. She was engaged in detailed discussions regarding culinary arrangements with the royal chef, meticulously reviewing burgeoning trade agreements with visiting merchants, and generally comporting herself with the serene assurance of a woman whose husband remained undeniably and robustly alive. Yet here lay the profound conundrum. King Sisyphus was demonstrably no longer among the living. Thanatos, the very harbinger of demise, had undeniably claimed him. Witnesses had observed the event firsthand, or more precisely, they had beheld the formidable god of death guiding the monarch into that ephemeral, shadowy realm to which all mortal souls are ultimately destined. Therefore, the perplexing question remained: why did his royal consort behave as if he had merely embarked upon a brief, ordinary excursion, rather than having passed into the great beyond? To fully comprehend the unfolding enigma, one must revert to the precise nature of the boon Sisyphus had so cunningly requested. In the dire confrontation with death, the vast majority of individuals implore for an extension of their earthly existence, or perhaps for clemency, or merely a final opportunity for farewells. Sisyphus, however, had articulated a request of far greater specificity, one that, as subsequent events would reveal, was imbued with a significantly higher degree of ingenious subtlety. "Prior to my departure with you," he calmly stated to Thanatos, "I would find it prudent to ensure that all my worldly affairs are meticulously arranged. You comprehend, do you not? I am, after all, a sovereign monarch. Weighty responsibilities are inherently attached to such a station, demanding a final, orderly disposition." Thanatos, having endured the indignity of several weeks spent in involuntary bondage due to Sisyphus's prior deceptions, adopted an attitude of justifiable circumspection. "What, precisely, do you signify by the term affairs in this context?" he queried, a note of suspicion in his voice. Nothing of a particularly dramatic nature, Sisyphus calmly reassured the god. Merely a brief discourse with my royal consort, the issuance of precise directives concerning my impending funeral rites, and the meticulous arrangement of the appropriate ceremonial observances. You are, I trust, fully cognizant of the profound cultural significance attached to such hallowed traditions in the mortal realm. Indeed, within the cultural tapestry of ancient Greece, the observance of proper funeral rites held an enormously profound and sacrosanct importance, forming an indispensable cornerstone of societal and spiritual belief. It was universally believed that without the meticulous performance of these prescribed ceremonies, a departed soul would be condemned to wander eternally, unable to attain tranquil repose within the shadowy domains of the underworld. Even the omnipotent Olympian deities, despite their celestial stature, acknowledged and respected the inviolable sanctity of this deeply ingrained mortal tradition. Consequently, Thanatos, bound by this venerable custom and perhaps still slightly disoriented from his recent liberation, conceded to permit Sisyphus a final, private audience with his queen before their inevitable departure to the land of shades. What transpired immediately thereafter was the highly anticipated colloquy between King Sisyphus and his royal consort, Queen Merope. However, it proved to be a dialogue far removed from the heartfelt, sorrowful exchanges one might typically envision between a husband and wife, confronting the imminent reality of eternal separation. "Attend closely to my words," Sisyphus instructed her, his voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, ensuring that Thanatos, though present, would remain oblivious to their secret communication. "When my demise inevitably occurs, and I assure you it will transpire very shortly, you are, under no circumstances, to perform the customary funeral rites." Queen Merope's countenance registered profound bewilderment. "What precisely do you mean by such an extraordinary directive?" she questioned, her voice tinged with perplexity. "No solemn funeral rites whatsoever, no respectful offerings to the Olympian gods, no placement of the customary obols upon my eyes for the venerable ferryman Charon. Nothing at all to facilitate your passage. Permit everyone," Sisyphus instructed, "to labor under the misapprehension that you have merely become uncharacteristically neglectful or forgetful regarding these crucial ceremonial matters, rather than deliberately omitting them." "But surely," Merope countered, her brow furrowed with concern, "without the meticulous observance of the proper rites, your very soul will be condemned to an inescapable state of entrapment, unable to proceed to its destined afterlife." "Precisely," Sisyphus affirmed, a subtle, knowing smile gracing his lips, a particular expression that invariably indicated his intellect was operating several stratagems ahead of all others present. "You must place your unwavering trust in my judgment concerning this peculiar instruction." Thus, when Thanatos, the somber conductor of souls, eventually escorted Sisyphus away toward the dim threshold of the underworld, Queen Merope adhered meticulously to her husband's singular and unconventional directives. She resumed her customary daily routine with an almost unsettling placidity. She initiated absolutely no arrangements for the traditional funeral rites, nor did she commission any ceremonial observances. Her demeanor conveyed the impression that her royal consort had merely embarked upon a protracted diplomatic mission or a distant mercantile venture, fully expected to return upon the successful conclusion of his duties. The underworld, it is imperative to understand, diverges significantly from the fiery, agonizing realm of eternal torment so frequently depicted in certain popular narratives and cautionary tales. Instead, it more closely resembles an immense, somber bureaucracy, an interminable labyrinth of dimly lit chambers and winding corridors through which newly arrived souls are meticulously processed, their earthly deeds impartially judged, and then dispatched to their designated eternal accommodations within the vast, shadowy domain, a place of order rather than chaos. Upon his arrival in this nether realm, Sisyphus was promptly directed, in accordance with the established protocol for all newly deceased souls, toward the desolate banks of the legendary river Styx. It is at this melancholic juncture that custom dictates the deceased must tender payment to Charon, the venerable ferryman of the dead, specifically 2 obols, to secure passage across the dark, swirling waters of the river into the deeper underworld. These requisite coins, it must be noted, ought to have been ceremonially positioned upon his eyelids during the proper execution of his funeral rites back in the mortal world, a crucial part of the transition. But, as we now understand, no such hallowed ceremonies had been performed for the cunning king. Consequently, Sisyphus found himself entirely devoid of the necessary currency for his spectral journey, a predicament entirely by design. "My deepest apologies," he conveyed to Charon, "but it appears there has been a significant oversight. My esteemed wife was entrusted with providing the necessary fare for my passage, yet it seems to have regrettably slipped her mind." Charon, a venerable ferryman who had diligently guided countless souls across the turbulent waters of the river Styx for untold millennia, possessed an unparalleled familiarity with every conceivable mortal predicament. However, the astonishing scenario of a deceased individual whose family had simply neglected to perform the indispensable funeral rites presented an anomaly so profound that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of established custom. "Without the requisite payment, my duties preclude me from transporting you across," Charon articulated, his voice resonating with ancient authority. "Such are the immutable regulations." Naturally, Sisyphus assented with a veneer of perfect understanding. "I grasp the gravity of the situation entirely. Rules, after all, are sacrosanct. Yet surely there exists an individual with whom I might discuss this peculiar circumstance. Some form of administrative review process, perhaps." And so, Sisyphus found himself navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the underworld's bureaucratic apparatus, akin to a protracted customer service complaint. He was unceremoniously passed from one subordinate functionary to another, each minor official grappling with the unprecedented dilemma of a soul unable to proceed to final judgment, because the foundational formalities had been demonstrably disregarded. Eventually, this vexing matter ascended to the highest authority, reaching Hades himself. The formidable sovereign of the underworld sat upon his obsidian throne, diligently poring over the day's voluminous paperwork, when a visibly agitated aide cautiously approached. "My lord," the aide began, his voice tinged with trepidation, "we are confronted with a most unusual situation. There's a soul presently awaiting processing who cannot be properly admitted because his funeral rites were never, in fact, performed." Hades momentarily ceased his perusal of the documents, lifting his gaze. "Never performed. That is indeed quite peculiar. And what explanation does the soul offer for this extraordinary omission?" "He claims his wife merely forgot, my lord." He appears to be rather distressed by the entire affair. Now Hades was not a deity easily deceived. Having presided over the netherworld for countless eons, he had witnessed and foiled every conceivable stratagem mortals might employ. Yet this particular predicament was genuinely unprecedented. A wife neglecting to perform the essential funeral rites for her departed husband. It was an assertion so wildly improbable that, paradoxically, it might actually be true. When Sisyphus was ushered into the formidable presence of the throne, he presented his carefully constructed case with a masterful display of perfect sincerity. He articulated profound shock and dismay that his beloved spouse could have been so utterly negligent. He voiced deep concern regarding the implications this lapse held for the sanctity of their marriage. He even fretted aloud about the potential scandal this egregious oversight would undoubtedly ignite back in his city of Corinth. "This situation is profoundly disturbing," he conveyed to Hades. "My poor Merope must be utterly consumed by grief. That, I suspect, is the sole reason she overlooked the rites. Her mind is undoubtedly clouded by sorrow." Hades observed this singular mortal with intense scrutiny. There was something about Sisyphus that stirred a faint, elusive sense of familiarity within him, though he could not quite place it. "And what course of action would you propose we take regarding this unprecedented situation?" "Well," Sisyphus mused, adopting a thoughtful demeanor, "I suppose someone ought to return to Corinth and gently remind my wife of her neglected duties, to ensure the proper ceremonies are meticulously performed." But who indeed could undertake such a delicate task? "Are you insinuating—" "Oh, I could never presume to suggest anything directly to a god," Sisyphus interjected swiftly, feigning deference. "But if an individual were to be temporarily restored to life, just long enough to rectify this administrative error, I would be eternally grateful for such a divine dispensation." And it was precisely at this critical juncture that Hades committed the very miscalculation Sisyphus had so meticulously engineered. Confronted with a truly unparalleled bureaucratic quandary, and presented with what appeared to be a remarkably reasonable solution, the formidable god of the underworld granted Sisyphus a provisional leave of absence, permitting his return to the land of the living to personally oversee his funeral arrangements. 3 days, Hades declared with unwavering authority. "You are allotted precisely 3 days to ensure the proper rites are meticulously performed. Thereafter, you are to return here immediately and without question." "Of course, my lord. 3 days will prove more than ample for the task." And so Sisyphus found himself miraculously repatriated to the vibrant world of the living, ostensibly for a mere 72 hours. And ostensibly solely for the purpose of orchestrating his own belated funeral. As he re-entered the grand palace doors that very evening, Queen Merope greeted him with a smile, though its forced quality did little to conceal her underlying nervousness. "How did it unfold?" she inquired, her voice a hushed whisper. "Perfectly," Sisyphus affirmed with a triumphant gleam in his eye, "though I strongly suspect we may find ourselves with rather a lot of explaining to do in a few days' time." As the resplendent sun descended over the ancient city of Corinth, painting the vast canvas of the sky in magnificent hues of burnished gold and deep crimson, Sisyphus stood upon his palace balcony, undeniably alive in a realm where he ought to have been irrevocably deceased. The gentle Mediterranean breeze carried the familiar, comforting symphony of his thriving city, the murmurs of merchants concluding their day's trade, the distant calls of children summoned for their evening meal, and the rhythmic, ceaseless lapping of waves against the harbor walls. He had, once again, achieved the seemingly impossible. He had not merely evaded the cold embrace of death. He had, through sheer audacity and cunning, persuaded death itself to courteously escort him back to the vibrant tapestry of life. Yet, as he observed the first nascent stars begin to emerge in the rapidly darkening firmament, a flicker of introspection might have crossed Sisyphus's mind, prompting him to ponder if perhaps his extraordinary cleverness had, in fact, overreached its own bounds. For the Olympian deities are renowned for their exceptionally long memories, and they possess a profound and enduring aversion to being publicly outwitted or made to appear foolish. The stipulated 3-day reprieve graciously extended by Hades predictably elapsed, precisely as one might anticipate from the notorious monarch who had once audaciously confined death itself. Picture, if you will, a stroll through the bustling streets of Corinth 6 months subsequent to Sisyphus's mandated re-entry into the underworld. The morning marketplace pulsates with its customary vibrant activity. Merchants vociferously hawk their diverse commodities, while children frolic with carefree abandon in the thoroughfares. And there, meticulously examining some particularly exquisite pottery at one of the stalls, stands King Sisyphus, thoroughly corporeal, evidently relishing his prolonged sabbatical from the clutches of mortality. You see, upon the expiration of the initial 3-day period, Sisyphus made a rather astonishing observation. He deduced that no infernal emissary was dispatched to enforce his return. It appeared the underworld, astonishingly, operated on a peculiar form of honor-based compliance when it came to temporary resurrections. They had simply presumed his adherence to the agreed-upon terms. This, it must be acknowledged, constituted a profound and serious miscalculation on their part. Sisyphus spent those illicit months indulging in his most cherished pursuits, governing his prosperous polis, savoring the myriad pleasures of earthly existence, and basking in an overwhelming sense of self-satisfaction for having repeatedly outmaneuvered the divine pantheon. This marked not merely a singular triumph, nor even a dual victory, but a resounding third act of defiance. He had previously imprisoned Thanatos, subsequently cajoled Hades into granting him a temporary reprieve, and then, with audacious simplicity, chose to remain. However, divine forbearance, while undeniably vast, possesses discernible limits. Inevitably, the celestial powers became cognizant that their provisional resurrection had transmuted into an unequivocally perpetual state. When they next sought Sisyphus, there was no dispatch of Thanatos, nor any adherence to customary due process or elaborate bureaucratic protocols. Instead, they deployed Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, armed with exceedingly precise directives. Secure Sisyphus without delay, employing any requisite means, and convey him forthwith to the underworld, his rightful dominion. Hermes materialized unobtrusively within the opulent palace throne room on a Tuesday morning, precisely as Sisyphus was immersed in the scrutiny of intricate trade accords. His arrival was devoid of theatrical fanfare, lacking any accompanying thunderous blasts or overt supernatural displays. In one instant, the chamber was occupied solely by the monarch. In the next, a youthful figure clad in unassuming traveler's attire stood calmly adjacent to the throne. Sisyphus. Hermes addressed him with an unnervingly mild demeanor. Your punctuality leaves much to be desired. Sisyphus, lifting his gaze from the parchment scrolls, affected an air of innocent inquiry, asking, "Late for what specific engagement?" "Your enduring rendezvous with eternity," Hermes clarified succinctly. "Your mandated re-entry into the underworld was scheduled fully half a year prior." "Ah, yes, that particular matter," Sisyphus responded dismissively. "Indeed, I have been intending to attend to it. However, royal responsibilities, as you can surely appreciate, have proven immensely demanding. Perhaps the following week would be more opportune." Hermes offered a faint smile, utterly devoid of genuine warmth. Regrettably, he stated unequivocally, "The proposed delay until next week is entirely unacceptable to all parties concerned. Our departure is imminent." And on this occasion, the opportunity for further parley was utterly non-existent. Hermes merely extended a hand, making a light contact with Sisyphus's shoulder. In an instant, the monarch found himself abruptly transported to the somber throne room of Hades, confronting a deity whose patience had demonstrably waned since their initial encounter. "Sisyphus," Hades intoned, his voice resonating with the gravitas of countless millennia, "it has become imperative that we engage in a most earnest discourse. The throne room within the underworld is assuredly not conceived for earthly solace. Its imposing walls, crafted from obsidian-hued stone, appear to ingest all ambient light rather than casting it back. The atmosphere remains perpetually cool and utterly motionless, entirely devoid of any fragrant vestiges from the vibrant world above. When Hades articulates, his pronouncements possess an unnerving resonance, lingering in the stagnant air with an almost tangible persistence. "You audaciously imprisoned my esteemed colleague Thanatos," Hades proceeded, his tone escalating in severity, thereby dislocating the inherent cosmic equilibrium for an extended period of weeks. "You subsequently beguiled me into bestowing upon you a provisional return to life, only to then flagrantly disregard your solemn pledge to return. Such an extravagant display of ingenuity, I assure you, cannot be permitted to persist." Sisyphus, remarkably, retained his characteristic poise even when confronted by the unbridled ire of the formidable deity of death. "I fully comprehend your exasperation, my lord," he responded calmly. "Might there be an opportunity to devise some mutually agreeable accord?" "Absolutely not," Hades declared with uncompromising finality. "There will be no further compacts, no additional bargaining, and certainly no more deceptions. You harbored such an intense desire to circumvent death. Very well, you shall receive precisely the outcome you so earnestly coveted." And it was at this juncture that Sisyphus was forced to confront the harsh reality, that occasionally the precise fulfillment of one's deepest desires can culminate in the most dreadful of repercussions. Hades, with a simple, decisive gesture, instantaneously transported Sisyphus to a desolate locale, utterly unlike any other he had witnessed within the underworld. It was a bleak, craggy mountainside, its stark slopes ascending interminably towards a perpetually overcast firmament. Before him, resting at his feet, was a formidable boulder, not colossal in scale, perhaps, but undeniably substantial enough to present an arduous physical challenge. The stone itself was perfectly spherical, its surface rendered impeccably smooth by the relentless attrition of innumerable centuries of atmospheric forces. "This shall be your perpetual abode," Hades pronounced with chilling finality, "and this your eternal occupation. You are enjoined to propel this immense stone to the apex of the mountain. Only upon attaining the summit may you consider yourself at liberty to repose. Sisyphus cast his gaze upon the immense stone, then toward the imposing mountain, before turning back to face Hades. He responded with a surprising nonchalance, remarking that the assigned task did not in fact appear overly daunting. Indeed, he mused, a period of vigorous physical exertion might even prove beneficial for him. But there remains one crucial particular, Hades interjected, a chilling smile, devoid of any genuine warmth, spreading across his countenance. This colossal rock is subject to a powerful enchantment. Each time you approach the mountain's pinnacle, it will inevitably plummet back to its base, compelling you to recommence your arduous labor. For the very first occasion in his exceptionally protracted and famously ingenious existence, Sisyphus found himself utterly bereft of words, struck dumb by the profound implications of this revelation. "And this shall endure for all time," Hades elaborated, ensuring his grim pronouncement was unequivocally understood. "You ardently wished to evade the clutches of death. My congratulations. You shall never perish. Instead, you are condemned to propel this very rock up this very mountain for the entirety of eternity." With that final, chilling declaration, Hades dissipated into thin air, leaving Sisyphus in desolate solitude on the mountain's rugged flank, accompanied only by his formidable boulder and the dawning, dreadful comprehension of the true essence of divine retribution. On the inaugural day of his torment, Sisyphus confronted the formidable undertaking with his characteristic self-assurance. He pondered how genuinely difficult it could prove to be. After all, he possessed a keen intellect, boundless resourcefulness, and extensive experience in surmounting seemingly insurmountable obstacles. With a determined resolve, he braced his shoulder against the immense stone and commenced his laborious ascent. The boulder, though undeniably weighty, was not impossibly so. The mountainous incline was undeniably steep, yet his physical prowess remained considerable. Methodically, step by laborious step, foot by strenuous foot, hour after grueling hour, he steadily advanced up the challenging slope. The colossal stone rolled with surprising smoothness over the uneven rocky terrain. His muscles strained with exertion. Beads of perspiration streamed down his visage, yet he pressed onward, steadily closing the distance to the coveted summit. As the ceaseless hours wore on, Sisyphus found his thoughts drifting, contemplating the intricate tapestry of his past life, reminiscing about the vibrant city of Corinth, his beloved wife Merope, and the myriad of cunning stratagems that had ultimately orchestrated his arrival at this desolate precipice. The sheer physicality of the labor, surprisingly, offered a peculiar form of solace. It provided his perpetually active mind with a singular, uncomplicated objective upon which to concentrate. As what he perceived to be the twilight hours approached, though the passage of time felt strangely altered in this otherworldly realm, Sisyphus could discern the summit drawing ever nearer. Only a few more precarious yards remained. Just a little more concentrated effort. His legs throbbed with an insistent ache. His back felt a profound soreness. Yet the sweet taste of victory seemed tantalizingly within his grasp. With a final, monumental surge of strength, he delivered one last, powerful thrust to the boulder, and it successfully breached the mountain's crest. For a brief, fleeting moment, Sisyphus stood atop the summit, his chest heaving with exertion, yet imbued with a profound sense of triumph. He had, against all odds, accomplished the impossible. Even amidst the confines of an eternal damnation, he had discovered a pathway to success. He was, undeniably, still far more cunning than the Olympian deities had ever acknowledged. Then, with an agonizing inevitability, the immense boulder commenced its relentless descent down the opposing face of the mountain. Initially, a desperate flicker of hope ignited within him. He believed he could intercept it. He dashed frantically after the careening stone, stretching out his arms to seize it, to arrest its precipitous plunge. But the boulder gathered momentum with terrifying speed, bounding and careening uncontrollably down the rugged, rocky slope, utterly beyond his command. Sisyphus watched in horrified disbelief as the entirety of his day's grueling labor vanished into oblivion within a mere span of minutes. The colossal stone rolled unhindered all the way to the very bottom of the mountain, coming to rest in precisely the identical spot from which he had embarked that very morning. And in that crushing moment, a terrible understanding dawned upon him. This was not merely a generic retribution for his manifold deceptions and convoluted machinations. This was a punishment meticulously crafted and singularly designed for an individual of his precise nature. For someone who derived immense satisfaction from unraveling intricate problems, from conceiving innovative solutions, from emerging victorious in contests that others deemed utterly unwinnable. The true cruelty, he realized, did not reside in the sheer physical exertion. It lay instead in the insidious poison of hope. Each succeeding day, he would be compelled to propel the monstrous boulder up the mountain. Each day, he would experience the illusion of progress, savoring the fleeting satisfaction of advancing toward his elusive objective. Each day, he would attain the summit and revel in a transient moment of triumph. And each day, he would be forced to witness that hard-won triumph dissolve into utter futility as the stone inexorably rolled back down. As Sisyphus commenced his slow, melancholic descent back down the mountain, preparing to embark upon his Sisyphean task once more, he grasped the profound truth. The gods had engineered the quintessential punishment for a man who harbored the audacious belief that he could outmaneuver the very fabric of destiny itself. They had, with a cruel twist of fate, bestowed upon him precisely what he had always covertly yearned for: an unending challenge, an interminable game to meticulously play. The singular, devastating flaw was that it was a game he could never, under any circumstances, truly win. Yet an intriguing facet concerning Sisyphus presents itself, a nuance that the Olympian deities perhaps failed to fully appreciate when they meticulously conceived his eternal torment. He was, fundamentally, an individual who took immense pride in his unwavering persistence, in his unyielding resolve to continue striving even when all probabilities were stacked against him. And as he once again placed his shoulder against the monumental boulder for the second iteration of his endless labor, there lingered in his resolute expression a subtle intimation that he had not yet been entirely vanquished. After all, eternity stretches out for an immeasurable duration, and a man possessing sufficient sagacity to have once ensnared death itself might, eventually, unearth some latent meaning, some minuscule gratification, some private internal victory, even within the confines of the most perfectly orchestrated punishment the gods could conceivably devise. While Sisyphus endures his perpetual days, eternally endeavoring to propel a massive boulder up an endless mountain, Life within the vibrant city of Corinth progresses ceaselessly without his direct involvement. Nevertheless, the metropolis he so conspicuously departed continues to bear the indelible imprints of his distinctive rule, manifesting in both overt and subtly pervasive ways. Envision yourself perambulating through the bustling thoroughfares of Corinth on a typical morning, perhaps a full year after Sisyphus's final conclusive disappearance. The city, far from stagnating, has not ceased its vibrant functioning. If anything, it now operates with an unexpected degree of enhanced efficiency, yet an intangible quality permeates the very air, an elusive characteristic that unmistakably distinguishes Corinth from its Hellenic counterparts. Your journey might commence at the Agora, the vibrant marketplace that serves as the throbbing heart of the city's commercial life. The merchants who ply their trade here possess a singular reputation that echoes throughout the entirety of Greece. They are widely acclaimed for their extraordinarily astute negotiation tactics, for their uncanny ability to conjure ingenious solutions to complex dilemmas that confound traders from other cities, and for a nearly preternatural aptitude for transmogrifying any perceived disadvantage into a lucrative opportunity. Consider, for instance, the case of Marcus, the astute pottery merchant. He is currently engaged in an elaborate discourse with a discerning customer hailing from Athens, meticulously expounding upon why his collection of vases, each bearing a delicate, albeit visible, crack, are, in fact, inherently more valuable than their unblemished counterparts. You perceive, Marcus articulates, tracing a finger along the fine fissure, this very line encapsulates the clay's arduous pilgrimage through the crucible of fire. It stands as irrefutable testimony that this vessel has been rigorously tested and emerged fundamentally robust. A pot devoid of such marks, conversely, has yet to truly face its trial. The Athenian customer initially maintains a skeptical demeanor, yet, remarkably, by the culmination of their intricate exchange, he finds himself not only willingly tendering additional payment for the flawed pottery, but also expressing profuse gratitude to Marcus for his enlightening pedagogical discourse. This scenario epitomizes the quintessential Corinthian salesmanship, the extraordinary facility to ingeniously reframe any perceived imperfection as a desirable attribute, and any seemingly insurmountable obstacle as a fertile ground for burgeoning opportunity. It is a nuanced skill that the city's merchants assiduously cultivated over years of observing their astute king. Sisyphus possessed an unparalleled talent for compelling individuals to perceive situations from entirely novel perspectives, and that distinctive aptitude became intrinsically woven into the very fabric of the city's cultural identity. As one continues to navigate through the vibrant marketplace, another distinctly Corinthian characteristic becomes conspicuously apparent: the unconventional methodology with which its inhabitants approach the resolution of problems. When, for example, the local baker's essential oven unexpectedly malfunctions, instead of merely summoning a conventional repairman, he resourcefully devises an intricate system employing an array of mirrors and strategically directed sunlight to sustain the continuous baking of his daily bread. Similarly, upon the arrival of a merchant vessel laden with cargo deemed excessively ponderous for the standard dockside cranes, the resourceful dock workers ingeniously fashion a sophisticated pulley system utilizing the ship's own towering masts. These improvised solutions are not necessarily inherently superior to more conventional approaches. Indeed, on occasion, they prove to be considerably more convoluted. Nevertheless, they are undeniably products of an inventive spirit, emerging from a civic culture that assiduously learned to navigate around impediments, rather than stubbornly attempting to force its way through them. Within the regal confines of the palace, Queen Merope has commendably assumed the day-to-day administrative governance of Corinth. She has unequivocally demonstrated herself to be an exceptionally capable sovereign in her own right. Though her executive methodology is discernibly more direct and forthright than that which characterized her husband's reign. When she engages in the negotiation of critical trade agreements, for instance, she adheres rigorously to the precise stipulations articulated within the contractual documents. This unwavering adherence to literal interpretation has necessitated a considerable period of adjustment for Corinth's long-standing trading partners, who had grown accustomed to Sisyphus's famously flexible and often self-serving interpretations of written compacts. Consequently, numerous merchants from neighboring cities have expressed genuine and somewhat surprised satisfaction upon discovering that when Queen Merope pledges the delivery of 100 amphoras of premium olive oil, she invariably delivers precisely 100 amphoras of premium olive oil, rather than, for example, 97 amphoras accompanied by an elaborately convoluted explanation asserting how 3 amphoras are numerically and qualitatively equivalent to 100, when one meticulously factors in the demonstrably superior excellence of the oil in question. Nevertheless, not every aspect of Sisyphus's pervasive influence has entirely dissipated. The children of the city, for example, are diligently nurtured on a rich tapestry of narratives recounting their former king's audacious exploits. Yet, these are not the archetypal heroic sagas commonly found in other lands. Instead, they are captivating anecdotes centered on themes of profound cleverness, the discovery of highly unconventional solutions, and the critical importance of strategic foresight, of perpetually thinking 3 steps ahead. Should one venture into the local schoolhouse, where young Corinthians assiduously acquire their foundational letters and numbers, one might overhear the esteemed teacher recounting the captivating tale of how Sisyphus ingeniously persuaded a rival monarch to exchange his finest war horses for a humble herd of mules, by cunningly demonstrating that mules, owing to their part donkey lineage, were unequivocally more intelligent than horses and, ipso facto, inherently more valuable. The impressionable children greet these narratives with unbridled enthusiasm, not because the stories implicitly advocate for dishonesty, but because they eloquently celebrate the virtues of sharp intellect and boundless creativity. They absorb the invaluable lesson that there often exists more than a singular pathway to surmount a challenge, and that the most patently obvious solution is not invariably the most efficacious. This deeply ingrained cultural emphasis on intellectual agility yields tangible and practical advantages across various sectors. Corinth's celebrated engineers, for instance, are widely lauded throughout the entirety of Greece for their groundbreaking and innovative construction methodologies. The city's expansive harbor, a significant infrastructure project considerably augmented during Sisyphus's reign, ingeniously incorporates a sophisticated system of redirected oceanic currents that meticulously maintains a sufficient water depth for even the largest seafaring vessels, thereby obviating the need for constant, laborious dredging. A remarkably elegant solution that utterly confounded engineers from other city-states until they undertook a painstaking and meticulous study of its underlying principles. The Corinthian military, too, conspicuously exhibits the enduring hallmarks of Sisyphus's strategic influence. Rather than relying solely on brute force and unyielding bravery, Corinthian soldiers undergo rigorous training designed to cultivate acute tactical acumen. They are meticulously instructed to exploit advantageous terrain, to discern and target their adversaries' inherent vulnerabilities, and to secure decisive victories through sophisticated strategy rather than mere overwhelming physical might. A visiting Spartan general, renowned for his unyielding discipline, once grudgingly conceded with a tone of reluctant respect that engaging in combat with Corinthians was akin to participating in a game of chess against an opponent who perpetually altered the established rules, not through overt deception, but by consistently unearthing novel interpretations of those rules that no other strategist had ever contemplated. Perhaps the most captivating characteristic of post-Sisyphus Corinth lies in the populace's judicious approach to authority. Having been governed by a monarch renowned for ingeniously outmaneuvering even the gods, Corinthians cultivated a healthy skepticism and critical discernment toward anyone asserting mastery over profound insights. When a peripatetic philosopher arrived in the city, purporting to hold ultimate wisdom concerning the very nature of reality, the Corinthians would extend polite audience, yet follow with a barrage of acutely perceptive queries that progressively exposed the lacuna in his proclaimed knowledge. This was not born of malice or a desire to humiliate. On the contrary, they possessed an authentically inquisitive spirit regarding novel concepts, but they had learned never to accept any assertion without meticulous scrutiny. This inherent cognitive autonomy transformed Corinth into a magnet for intellectual luminaries and pioneering minds from across the entire Mediterranean basin. Scholars understood that if their theories could be articulated persuasively within Corinth, they could command acceptance anywhere, precisely because Corinthian audiences posed the most incisive inquiries. The city's sacred edifices, too, bore the indelible mark of Sisyphus's legacy. While other Hellenic cities might construct temples designed to awe the deities with monumental scale and lavish magnificence, Corinthian temples were conceived with an ingenious ingenuity, crafted for intellectual elegance. The temple dedicated to Apollo, for instance, was artfully positioned such that the morning sun bathed the god's statue precisely, causing it to radiate with an ethereal luminescence, appearing imbued with celestial brilliance. The Temple of Aphrodite, conversely, employed auditory principles with such mastery that a murmured supplication at one extremity could be distinctly audible at the altar, fostering the perception among devotees that the goddess herself was attending intimately to their requests. These were not endeavors to delude the gods, for the Greeks were far too devout for such sacrilege. Instead, they stood as profound manifestations of inventive spirit and devout reverence, enriching the spiritual encounter with heightened significance and lasting impact. As dusk descended over Corinth, one might discover themselves nestled within one of the city's bustling public houses, absorbing the surrounding conversations. The subjects remained consistent with those found in any Greek city: affairs of state, commercial ventures, familial matters, and local gossip. Yet there existed a distinctive characteristic in how Corinthians engaged with these topics. When an individual articulated a challenge or dilemma, the initial reaction was rarely commiseration or counsel. Instead, it was a cascade of questions. Have you contemplated approaching this from an alternative direction? What if the core issue is not, in fact, what you perceive it to be? What consequences might ensue if you were to undertake the precise opposite of general expectation? This was far from cold intellectualism. Corinthians nurtured deep affection for their companions and neighbors, but they had absorbed from their former sovereign that the most efficacious way to assist someone was frequently to help them reframe their predicament and approach it with a fresh perspective. A burgeoning merchant, anxious over contention from a rival trader, might depart a Corinthian tavern with a profoundly altered perception of his enterprise, not because someone dispensed advice, but because pertinent inquiries aided him in discerning latent advantages he had previously overlooked. As one makes their way homeward through the tranquil thoroughfares, past houses where families were preparing for repose, one might ponder the significance of residing in a city molded by a figure akin to Sisyphus. It is not to suggest that every individual in Corinth was a deceiver or an intriguer. The majority of citizens were upright, industrious, and candid in their dealings. Nevertheless, they had all been touched by the compelling notion that intelligence and creativity represented commendable attributes, deserving of nurturing. They had internalized the understanding that problems frequently possessed numerous avenues for resolution, that authority, while respected, should be challenged with deference yet unwavering resolve, and that the capacity for unconventional thought constituted one of humanity's most profound endowments. In a remarkable sense, Sisyphus ultimately attained a form of enduring legacy, not through circumventing Thanatos, but through the persistent sway he exerted over the populace he ruled. Every instance, a Corinthian merchant devised an inventive resolution to a commercial dilemma. Every time a Corinthian engineer designed a pioneering structure, every occasion a Corinthian citizen posed a penetrating question that addressed the core of a matter, something of Sisyphus persistently endured. Perhaps this constituted a superior form of perpetual existence than he ever realized. Not an endless personal being, but the perpetuation of concepts and principles that enrich the global tapestry with greater intrigue and intellectual vitality. The narrative of Sisyphus transcends the simple story of one sagacious monarch and his boulder. It delves into something far more expansive, the precarious equilibrium of authority between mortals and gods, and the ramifications when an individual defiantly rejects their designated role within that balance. Envision yourself situated within the grand assembly hall of Mount Olympus. Several days following Sisyphus's assignment to his perpetual labor, the gods convened for one of their customary convocations, deliberating upon human concerns and the governance of the cosmos. Yet, on this particular day, the discourse persistently reverted to the case of the Corinthian king. Zeus, the sovereign of the gods, occupied his throne with a contemplative mien. Around him, his kindred deities deliberated the profound ramifications of what they had just witnessed. For Sisyphus, it was clear, had raised questions that extended well past basic culpability and its judicial consequence. The core issue, declared Athena, the sagacious deity, is not merely that he bound the personification of death or deceived the lord of the underworld. The fundamental problem is that he succeeded. For months, he actually managed to destabilize the intrinsic fabric of reality. Apollo, the divine patron of melody and prescient foresight, concurred with a slight inclination of his head. Mortals in other cities are already recounting tales about Sisyphus. Some of these narratives carry an undertone of approbation. This indeed represented the paramount challenge the gods were contending with. It was not simply about chastising a single individual for his transgressions. It concerned upholding the grand design, the overarching framework that ensured the cosmos operated. If humankind began to believe they could effectively defy celestial dominion, what would become of the universal equilibrium? Hades, still rather chagrined about being outmaneuvered by a mere human, interjected. The retribution I have conceived should function as a cautionary example. Every human who hears the story will comprehend that ingenuity by itself is insufficient to vanquish the deities. But will they truly? Inquired Hermes. Sisyphus did not fail because he was insufficiently astute. He failed because we ultimately opted to employ colossal power to halt his endeavors. That is not the same thing at all. And indeed, this differentiation held paramount importance. The gods had not bested Sisyphus through intellectual combat. They had not surpassed him in cunning or ensnared him with his own stratagem. They had merely exerted their celestial might to supersede his human ingenuity. This action conveyed an entirely distinct implication than they might have originally purposed. The dynamic between humans and deities was not akin to the bond of servitude and dominion between slaves and masters. It more closely resembled the rapport between constituents and their ruling body, intricate, occasionally contentious, yet regulated by specific implicit conventions. Mortals were obligated to revere the deities, execute appropriate ceremonies, and resign themselves to their destiny. In return, the gods were anticipated to be equitably just, to recompense merit, and to uphold universal harmony. When either side transgressed these norms, difficulties inevitably emerged. Sisyphus had breached his end of the covenant in an extraordinary manner. However, his violations exposed an unsettling truth about the god's side of the equation. He had triumphed in his stratagems, not through any preternatural ability, but through meticulous scrutiny of how the celestial mechanism genuinely functioned and the leveraging of its inherent vulnerabilities. When he bound Thanatos, he did so by engaging the god of death's professional self-esteem and inquisitive nature. When he cunningly persuaded Hades to permit his resurrection, he capitalized on the administrative intricacies of the realm of the dead and the deities, reverence for appropriate burial ceremonies. These were not mystical resolutions. They were systemic manipulation on a cosmic magnitude. Back within the human realm, thinkers and statesmen were commencing to deliberate the ramifications. In Athens, a young philosopher named Democritus was formulating concepts concerning the essence of existence that bore a debt to Sisyphus's precedent. If a mortal could comprehend celestial mechanisms sufficiently to exert control over them, what did that reveal regarding the intrinsic character of such frameworks? In Sparta, martial tacticians were scrutinizing Sisyphus's approaches. How had he managed to pinpoint vulnerabilities in what appeared to be flawless frameworks? How had he preserved his equanimity when confronting celestial indignation? These were proficiencies that could find utility in exclusively human disputes. The narrative was disseminating across the Hellenic realm, yet transforming with its propagation. Some versions highlighted Sisyphus's overweening pride and his ultimate retribution, functioning as a cautionary tale about the perils of defying the deities. Other versions concentrated on his ingenuity and tenacity, elevating him to near-legendary status. In the account told in the egalitarian Athenian polis, Sisyphus became an emblem of cognitive liberation. A man who rejected the premise that any authority, even celestial, was immune to scrutiny. Attic narrators underscored his meticulous cerebration, his methodical strategy for challenges, and his readiness to confront the repercussions of his actions. In more traditionalist Lacedaemon, the story was recounted differently. Here, Sisyphus embodied the hazards of unbridled self-interest. Spartan versions of the tale accentuated how his egoistic yearning to escape Thanatos disturbed the inherent equilibrium and inflicted hardship upon fellow beings. The ethical teaching emphasized the value of assenting to one's designated function within the broader collective. Yet, perhaps the most compelling narratives of Sisyphus are those recounted in the smaller urban centers across Greece, in locales such as Corinth itself, where the populace experiences the direct governance of monarchs and despots. Within these particular renditions, Sisyphus emerges as an intricate individual, his story serving as a profound cautionary tale regarding the inherent limitations of even the most astute defiance against entrenched power. These local chroniclers do not depict Sisyphus as strictly either a hero or a villain. Rather, they portray him as a man of formidable intellect who grasped a fundamental truth about the essence of authority: that every conceivable system, regardless of its perceived immensity or flawless design, harbors inherent vulnerabilities that can be exploited by an exceptionally observant individual. However, these interpretations also underscore the ultimate restriction of such an approach. While intellectual acuity can indeed leverage systemic flaws, it possesses no capacity to fundamentally alter the foundational distribution of power. Sisyphus, for instance, could manipulate the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the gods, but he could never elevate himself to divine status. He was able to delay his inescapable destiny, yet he could not evade it entirely. This nuanced understanding of the narrative profoundly resonates with individuals who subsist under political frameworks they are powerless to directly challenge. They comprehend the allure of devising stratagems to circumvent authority, but they also recognize the crucial importance of acknowledging when such efforts inevitably reach their ultimate boundaries. Meanwhile, high above on Mount Olympus, the celestial deities are arriving at remarkably similar conclusions. The audacious actions of Sisyphus have compelled them to deliberate more meticulously on the precise manner in which they wield their immense authority. They have come to the stark realization that projecting an image of foolishness or ineptitude carries nearly the same peril as demonstrating actual vulnerability. We must exercise greater vigilance, Zeus, the king of the gods, declared emphatically. Not because mortals represent any existential peril to our dominion, but because our authority is, in part, predicated upon their unwavering respect. Should they lose esteem for our competence, they might well begin transgressing boundaries that we decidedly prefer remain unchallenged. This critical introspection subsequently precipitated what could be termed a series of reforms within the divine governmental apparatus. The gods commenced a more rigorous examination of the systematic frailties that Sisyphus had so cunningly exposed. Consequently, operational procedures were fortified, spheres of responsibility were meticulously clarified, and robust safeguards were implemented to preclude any future administrative circumvention. However, they also initiated a more nuanced transformation. They began to emphasize and reward different virtues in their ongoing interactions with mortal beings. Instead of merely demanding unquestioning obedience and profound reverence, they progressively started to commend intellectual acuity and inventive spirit. Crucially, as long as these commendable qualities were channeled towards beneficial rather than disruptive objectives, figures like the hero Odysseus, for example, garnered increasing favor among the gods during this transformative period. Much like Sisyphus, Odysseus was renowned for his exceptional ingenuity and his remarkable ability to conceive creative solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. But unlike Sisyphus, Odysseus employed these formidable talents in service of goals that unequivocally earned divine approval. His arduous journey home to his beloved family, the valiant defense of his kingdom, and the meticulous preservation of societal equilibrium. This pivotal shift represents a form of strategic accommodation. The gods acknowledged that intelligence and creativity are indeed laudable attributes that should be encouraged, not suppressed. Yet they simultaneously made it unequivocally clear that these faculties must be exercised judiciously, strictly within the overarching bounds of cosmic order. As countless years unfolded, the saga of Sisyphus evolved into a ubiquitous reference point for profound discussions concerning power, resistance, and the inherent limitations of both. When a tyrannical ruler became excessively oppressive, people might lament that he was coercing his subjects to become like Sisyphus, implying that he was pushing them towards desperate and ultimately self-defeating acts of opposition. Conversely, when a rebel or revolutionary began to overestimate their prospects of success, their confidants might caution them not to roll the dice boulder, a phrase that came to signify the pursuit of a futile struggle destined for ruin. Nevertheless, the narrative also furnished a rich vocabulary for articulating legitimate resistance to authority. When an individual skillfully identified systemic imperfections or ingeniously found ways to navigate around inequitable regulations, they might be lauded for their Sisyphean insight, that remarkable capacity to discern underlying fragilities within seemingly immutable power constructs. In this profound manner, Sisyphus transcends the role of a mere character in an admonitory narrative. He transforms into an enduring symbol of the perpetual dialectic between dominion and intellect, between raw might and sagacious wisdom, between passively accepting the world as it is and boldly envisioning how it might be different. And perhaps this is precisely why his story continues to resonate with such potent relevance thousands of years later. We all subsist within intricate systems of power that often appear overwhelming and permanent. We all confront moments where we must choose between acquiescence to imposed constraints or daring to test their boundaries. We all ponder whether sheer ingenuity and unwavering tenacity can indeed surmount seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The narrative of Sisyphus suggests that the answer is both affirmative and negative. Yes, intelligence and creative force possess the remarkable ability to accomplish extraordinary feats, to expose weaknesses even within the most formidable systems, and to secure triumphs that once seemed utterly impossible. But no, these victories are often ephemeral, and the immense cost of achieving them may ultimately exact a price that far eclipses their temporary benefits. While Sisyphus relentlessly propels his eternal boulder, let us momentarily divert our attention to explore the vast, complex realm where his punishment unfolds. For the underworld, one must understand, is far more than simply a destination for the deceased. It is, in its entirety, a fully fledged civilization, boasting its own distinct culture, intricate political landscape, and established daily rhythms. Imagine yourself traversing the administrative heart of Hades. It is not the infernal agony one might anticipate, but rather an environment strikingly akin to the governmental precinct of a major metropolis. One observes structures crafted from smooth black stone, interminable corridors flanked by towering archives that stretch beyond sight, and the ceaseless murmur of scribes diligently transcribing with their styluses on boundless parchments. The underworld, you see, is charged with the monumental task of processing every single soul that departs life anywhere in the world. This necessitates a staggering volume of documentation. Each individual soul requires meticulous evaluation, impartial judgment, and precise allocation to its designated afterlife segment. It is an intricate operation demanding meticulous structure and unwavering attention to detail. At the very core of this meticulously organized system reside the triumvirate of underworld judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacchus. These eminent figures were mortal monarchs during their earthly lives, specially selected for their profound sagacity and unwavering impartiality to fulfill perpetual judicial roles. They dedicate their timeless existence, though temporal dynamics operate uniquely within the underworld, to scrutinizing individual cases and arbitrating the eternal placement of countless souls. Each judge maintains a specialized jurisdiction over distinct categories of cases. Minos arbitrates the intricate ethical dilemmas, specifically those involving profound moral quandaries experienced during mortal lives. Rhadamanthus presides over matters of righteousness and complex legal precedents. Iacchus, conversely, oversees the simpler, more direct assessments. Today, they are collectively reviewing the file of a merchant hailing from Rhodes who passed away just last week. The man was generally upright in his commercial dealings, deeply devoted to his family, and a significant benefactor to his community's local shrine. Yet, he also amassed his considerable wealth by illicitly supplying weaponry to both warring factions during a regional conflict, thereby exacerbating and extending a war that inflicted immense anguish upon countless individuals. The intention behind the actions matters significantly, Rhadamanthus posited, asserting, he was not actively striving to prolong the conflict. He was simply conducting his legitimate business. But the detrimental effect was precisely the same, Minos countered sharply. He undeniably profited from widespread suffering, irrespective of his personal intentions. Iacchus, recognized as the most pragmatic of the three, directed their attention to a specific section within the merchant's comprehensive file. Consider what he subsequently accomplished with those profits. He financed the construction of 3 educational institutions and provided crucial medical care for war orphans. In essence, he utilized money gained from conflict to help mitigate its very repercussions. After an hour of intense deliberation, they ultimately arrived at a definitive decision. The merchant would be assigned to the intermediate zones of the underworld, where his stay would be neither punitive in the traditional sense, nor immediately idyllic within the peaceful meadows. He would be granted ample opportunities to expiate the moral debt accrued from his war profiteering through dedicated service to other souls. This refined form of adjudication is, in fact, characteristic of the underworld's actual operational philosophy. Despite the popular narratives about eternal torment, the vast majority of souls receive consequences that are more akin to comprehensive rehabilitation programs. The overarching objective is not retribution or malevolence, but rather the meticulous restoration of universal equilibrium. Of course, there are notable deviations from this general rule. Some souls do indeed receive genuinely perpetual condemnations, but these are stringently reserved for the most extreme cases, individuals whose transgressions were so foundational that they fractured the very fabric of cosmic order. People like, well, Sisyphus himself. The other infamous eternal detainees include Tantalus, who committed the horrific act of filicide and served his own son as a meal to the gods, and Ixion, who audaciously attempted to seduce Zeus's revered wife. These were not mere mundane misdeeds. They were egregious affronts to the fundamental tenets underpinning reality itself. However, for every soul enduring everlasting retribution, there are thousands diligently engaged in resolving transient repercussions stemming from more commonplace human imperfections. The underworld boasts extensive workshops where souls acquire proficiencies they never mastered during their mortal existence. There are dedicated therapeutic facilities where individuals work through the psychological harm they inflicted upon others. And there are serene meditation gardens where souls cultivate patience and profound humility. Former warriors, for instance, learn the intricate art of weaving, thereby cultivating patience and refined manual dexterity. Former tyrants participate in collaborative group tasks, learning the essence of cooperation and mutual respect. Former misers practice benevolence by assisting recently departed souls in adapting to their new and unfamiliar circumstances. The supervisors of these diverse programs are not malevolent entities or monstrous figures. They are, in fact, souls who have successfully completed their own restorative journeys and have voluntarily chosen to remain in the underworld, to guide and assist others. Many of them perceive this selfless service as profoundly more purposeful and fulfilling than any pursuit undertaken during their earthly lives. Among the many overseers in this ethereal realm is a reformed buccaneer commander named Thronon, who dedicated 3 decades within rigorous academic institutions, mastering mathematics, engineering, and architecture. Presently, he directs a comprehensive program designed to instruct recently deceased spirits in the art of construction, encompassing not merely the erection of physical structures, yet extending to the meticulous cultivation of robust communities, meaningful relationships, and unwavering trust. The living typically conceive of death as the definitive terminus, Thronon articulates to a gathering of newly inducted spirits. However, it more closely resembles a grand graduation ceremony. You have successfully completed the fundamental curriculum of earthly being. Now commences the rigorous postgraduate studies. His current cohort comprises a diverse assembly of souls drawn from various corners of the ancient world. There resides a formidable Celtic chieftain who must internalize the principle that brute force is not invariably the optimal solution to complex problems. Alongside him is an Egyptian scribe, a man possessing exceptional numerical acumen, yet tragically lacking in interpersonal finesse. Then there is a Persian merchant, lavish in his familial affections, but unsparing in his dealings with rivals. These disparate individuals collaborate on intricate projects that necessitate each contributing their inherent capabilities while simultaneously confronting their inherent shortcomings. The Celtic chieftain, for instance, cultivates the art of active listening to others' perspectives. The Egyptian scribe develops the faculty for elucidating intricate notions in terms comprehensible to all. The Persian merchant fosters a profound empathy for the well-being of unfamiliar individuals. It is a protracted endeavor, yet one devoid of vexation. There is profound gratification derived from skill acquisition, a deeper self-comprehension, and the incremental metamorphosis into one's latent, unfulfilled potential. The person one always harbored the capacity to be, but never quite managed to become during their terrestrial existence. Naturally, not every denizen of the netherworld is enrolled in remedial programs. The spirits who lived exemplary existences proceed directly to the hallowed Elysian plains, serene, verdant expanses where they may devote their perpetual existence to pursuits of their own volition. Many among them choose to persist in their intellectual and spiritual evolution, albeit without the formalized curricula required for souls with further developmental tasks. Moreover, there exists the option of metempsychosis, or reincarnation. After an interim period within the chthonic realm, assimilating essential wisdom, some souls opt to re-engage with the terrestrial plane. They partake of the waters of the river Lethe, thereby expunging all recollection of their past lives, and are subsequently reincarnated into novel existences replete with nascent prospects. This intricate system engenders a fascinating interplay of forces within the underworld. Some areas present an immutable and established character, populated by spirits who have discovered their perpetual abode. Other sectors possess more of a pedagogical ambiance, characterized by an ever-shifting cohort of denizens diligently striving towards their subsequent cosmic appointment. The enduring inhabitants frequently engage in the governance of this domain. They function as mentors, instructors, navigators, and scribes within the immense administrative apparatus that ensures the seamless operation of all functions. Many among them discover this work to be profoundly gratifying. They perceive themselves as participating in an endeavor transcending individual concerns, actively helping to uphold the universal equilibrium presiding over all being. Yet, even within this meticulously structured framework, there persist persistent difficulties and spirited discourse. The venerable arbiters consistently scrutinize protocols and operational methodologies, striving to guarantee the equitable dispensation of justice and to confirm that the restorative initiatives genuinely yield their intended outcomes. Recently, their deliberations have centered upon the peculiar predicament of Sisyphus and the inherent insights his chastisement offers regarding their established paradigm. His singular talent for circumventing celestial administrative structures has necessitated a re-evaluation of the protocols governing extraordinary circumstances. The fundamental issue, Minos remarks during a recent convocation, is that our entire framework was formulated to address typical spirits and conventional transgressions. We utterly failed to foresee an individual capable of perceiving celestial dominion as merely another conundrum awaiting resolution. But that is precisely why his chastisement is so apt, contends Rhadamanthus. He dedicated his mortal existence to grappling with intractable dilemmas. Consequently, he is now destined to an eternity of endeavoring to unravel the perpetually insoluble. Aeacus, ever the pragmatist, raises a distinct apprehension. Should his chastisement, in fact, prove efficacious, what then transpires? Supposing he ultimately cultivates a spirit of deference and resignation, is his liberation then warranted? It is an intriguing quandary. The underworld's restorative initiatives are fundamentally conceived for ultimate triumph, yet Sisyphus was condemned to perpetual torment. What happens if eternal punishment stands in direct opposition to the objective of fostering spiritual enlightenment and evolution? This kind of existential enigma is exactly the sort of thing that sustains the intellectual vibrancy of the netherworld for its enduring populace. They are not merely overseeing the upkeep of a celestial penitentiary. They are actively engaging in a ceaseless empirical exploration of equitable judgment, spiritual maturation, and the potential for absolution. As one traverses the underworld's serene sectors during the twilight hours, or the equivalent thereof in a domain devoid of solar illumination, one might chance upon spirits from disparate historical epochs engaged in profound philosophical discourse. A Stoic from Rome engaging in ethical disputation with an venerable Eastern intellectual. A Chaldean celestial observer exchanging insights with a Nilotic geometrician. A Viking combatant assimilating concepts of integrity from an oceanic wayfinder. The underworld, it turns out, is more than a mere terminus for the departed. It is a sanctuary where the most profound inquiries concerning being, equity, and human essence are deliberated by intellects liberated from the exigencies of terrestrial existence. It functions as a grand celestial academy where the pedagogical scope encompasses subjects ranging from rudimentary moral philosophy to the intrinsic fabric of actuality. And somewhere in this vast, complex realm, Sisyphus persists in his Sisyphean toil, propelling his immense stone towards the summit, potentially, through this arduous repetition, slowly internalizing insights that may one day transform him into an individual profoundly dissimilar from the astute monarch who presumed to circumvent the dominion of Thanatos. As our narrative has thus far chronicled the trials of Sisyphus and his contentious engagement with human impermanence, numerous other inhabitants of Hellenic lands have simultaneously faced their own confrontations with the inevitable reaper. With varying degrees of triumph, the poignant saga of Alcestis and Admetus illuminates an entirely distinct methodology for circumventing Thanatos, a strategy rooted in profound affection rather than astute cunning. Envision the ancient realm of Pherae, situated within the fertile plains of Thessaly, governed by the benevolent king Admetus, a sovereign revered across the Hellenic world for his magnanimity, probity, and pious veneration of the deities. In stark contrast to Sisyphus, who appeared to perceive celestial authorities as mere obstacles to be surmounted, Admetus harbored a sincere reverence for the gods and diligently endeavored to align his conduct with their divine precepts. Such piety yielded unforeseen dividends when Apollo, the illustrious deity of melody, prescience, and the solar orb, faced a provisional banishment from the Olympian heights as retribution for slaying the Cyclopes, those masterful artisans who had crafted Zeus's formidable lightning bolts. Apollo was condemned to a 12-month servitude under a terrestrial monarch. He possessed the prerogative to select any king in Greece, yet he elected Admetus as his charge. Throughout an entire annum, the Olympian patron of melody toiled as a pastoral guardian, diligently herding Admetus's numerous herds amidst the rolling hills adjacent to Pherae. One might readily conceive of this as a fraught juxtaposition, a vainglorious deity relegated to mundane toil, and a human sovereign grappling with the etiquette of hosting a celestial bondsman. Yet, against all odds, The situation unfolded with remarkable harmony. Admetus extended to Apollo the identical benevolence he bestowed upon all his liege folk. He never presumptuously sought to ascertain the true identity of the disguised divine shepherd. He merely guaranteed that all his pastoral workers, whether celestial or earthly, received ample sustenance, equitable remuneration, and dignified consideration. Apollo, for his part, immersed himself in his duties with celestial fervor. Under his divine superintendence, Admetus's livestock flourished to an unprecedented degree. The ovine members of the flock yielded the most exquisite fleece in all of Thessaly. The caprine animals provided lacteal sustenance so opulent it appeared imbued with solar radiance. Even the humble abodes of the herdsmen were transformed into sites of unforeseen splendor, for Apollo possessed an inherent compulsion to imbue all he encountered with euphony and elegance. Upon the culmination of his 12-month tenure, Apollo experienced genuine regret at his impending departure. He had developed a genuine affection for the unadorned cadence of bucolic existence, and profoundly valued Admetus's benevolent disposition. As a valedictory gesture, he bestowed upon the monarch an extraordinary privilege, that when Admetus's fated hour of demise arrived, he would be empowered to elude the grasp of Thanatos, provided he could secure a willing substitute to forfeit their own life. Initially, this offering appeared a magnanimous yet predominantly hypothetical endowment. Admetus, then in the prime of his youth, enjoyed robust health and exercised considerable prudence. The specter of mortality appeared exceedingly distant. He expressed his gratitude to Apollo with becoming grace, and subsequently accorded the matter scant further consideration. Numerous years unfolded in tranquil succession. Admetus entered into matrimony with Alcestis, the esteemed progeny of King Pelias, during a nuptial rite that stipulated the fulfillment of an ostensibly insurmountable challenge, harnessing both a formidable lion and a ferocious boar to a ceremonial conveyance. Apollo, whose gratitude for Admetus's benevolence remained undiminished, covertly aided him in achieving this extraordinary exploit. The conjugal union proved felicitous, enriched by offspring and burgeoning affluence, yet, inevitably, as is the decree for all who possess mortal breath, Admetus's destined hour arrived. Not by the fortunes of battle or unforeseen mishap, but by a precipitous malady that assailed him during the zenith of his vigor. As he languished on his deathbed, with the most eminent medical practitioners in Hellas powerless to intervene, he recalled the divine beneficence of Apollo, the prospect of a volunteer prepared to yield their life in his stead. The stipulation had appeared straightforward when Apollo initially articulated it. However, at this critical juncture, Admetus comprehended the true complexity of the proposition. By what means does one solicit such an ultimate sacrifice from another? Indeed, how might one even broach such a somber subject in common discourse? His initial contemplation turned to his venerable parents. Advanced in years, they had experienced complete existences and might conceivably accede to such an ultimate immolation for their progeny. Plagued by profound hesitation and acute mortification, he sought out his paternal figure. "Father," he uttered, grappling to articulate his profound request, "I stand before you with a petition, a boon of immense magnitude." As he elucidated his dire predicament, his father lent an attentive ear. Subsequently, with a blend of tenderness and resolve, he demurred. My beloved child, my affection for you is boundless, yet I am not prepared to relinquish my hold on this terrestrial sphere. There remain endeavors I wish to pursue, vistas I yearn to behold. Though my years have been numerous, the tapestry of my existence is not yet woven to its conclusion. His maternal parent offered a commensurate refusal. While empathetic to his grievous predicament, she likewise harbored the conviction that her mortal journey was still unfulfilled. She yearned to witness her grandchildren's maturation, to cultivate her cherished plots, and to bring her narratives to their proper denouement. King Admetus unexpectedly found himself grappling with a profound sense of disillusionment directed towards his own parents, who steadfastly desired to prolong their existence. There was an unsettling perception of self-interest in their reluctance, as it appeared incongruous that individuals who had already savored a prolonged lifespan would decline to offer their lives for a younger kinsman. Yet, simultaneously, he recognized the inherent human inclination to cling to life, understanding the deep-seated aversion to an untimely demise, even when faced with the prospect of saving a cherished individual. Consequently, he embarked upon a series of profoundly uncomfortable solicitations, approaching his most intimate companions, his devoted retinue of servants, and even those connected by more tenuous familial bonds. These discussions were fraught with an almost indescribable social unease. The fundamental challenge lay in articulating such an extraordinary plea. The blunt inquiry, "Would you be willing to forfeit your life so that I might continue mine?" proved to be inherently repellent, regardless of its delicate phrasing. A number of individuals offered various pretexts for their refusal, while others simply and unequivocally rejected the proposition. A select few appeared to genuinely contemplate the gravity of the request, before ultimately concluding that they lacked the resolve to undertake such a terminal commitment. In the aftermath of these highly unusual interactions, every person Admetus had approached regarded him with a subtly altered perception, as though the mere act of posing the question had irrevocably reshaped the very fabric of their connection. With each passing day, as his physical state steadily deteriorated, Admetus succumbed to an escalating sense of hopelessness. The divine boon bestowed by Apollo, which had initially appeared as an unparalleled act of benevolence, was now revealing itself to be utterly ineffectual. It became painfully evident that, despite his position and relationships, no individual cherished him sufficiently to willingly surrender their own life on his behalf. This stark and crushing revelation that his life was not deemed worthy of such an ultimate sacrifice by anyone proved to be an emotional agony that bordered on being more excruciating than the imminent specter of death itself. It was at this critical juncture that Alcestis, his devoted consort, arrived at a momentous resolution, an act of unparalleled devotion that would forever immortalize her name and resonate across the Hellenic lands for countless generations. She approached him with a gentle stillness one twilight hour, as he lay prone and debilitated by fever within the confines of their marital chamber. The space was enveloped in a soft gloom, illuminated solely by the flickering glow of oil lamps, which projected an intricate ballet of shadows across the textured surfaces of the walls. Beyond the confines of the palace, the customary clamor of the city was gradually subsiding, transitioning into the tranquil cadences of the deepening night. "I have been deeply contemplating the gravity of your plight," she articulated softly, as she gracefully settled herself beside him on the edge of the bed, her fingers gently enclosing his own. he managed to utter in a strained whisper, his voice barely audible. "Please, I implore you, do not even consider it. My conscience forbids me from ever burdening you with such an unspeakable request. You are not, in fact, soliciting this sacrifice," she responded with a calm and reassuring tone. "Rather, I am autonomously presenting this ultimate gift." The subsequent dialogue that unfolded between the royal couple bore no resemblance whatsoever to the intricate narratives detailing Sisyphus's cunning stratagems and deceptive machinations. There was an utter absence of artifice, no devious contrivance, no calculated efforts to uncover semantic ambiguities or to exploit legalistic intricacies. Instead, it was simply the heartfelt articulation of a woman's profound affection for her husband, as she meticulously expounded upon the profound reasons behind her unwavering willingness to embrace death so that he might endure. "Our progeny require the steadfast presence of a father," she declared with conviction. "The realm of Fire necessitates the continued reign of its king, and as for me, I would unequivocally prefer a truncated existence, imbued with the comforting certainty that you continue to inhabit this world, over a protracted lifespan shadowed by the desolate knowledge of your permanent absence." Admetus, in his desperation, endeavored to engage her in fervent debate, to propose myriad alternative solutions, and to earnestly persuade her to revoke her decision. Yet Alcestis had cemented her resolve with the identical serene steadfastness that characterized all her judgments. Her monumental choice stemmed not from an overwhelming wave of despondency or an impetuous whim. Rather, it represented a meticulously weighed and profoundly contemplated selection, rooted deeply in her intrinsic comprehension of profound affection and unwavering obligation. The actual transfer of life transpired with an astonishing degree of placidity and devoid of turmoil. Thanatos, the formidable deity personifying death, materialized silently within their private quarters, mirroring his earlier appearance in the opulent palace of Sisyphus. However, on this occasion, there were no clanking manacles, no cunning deceptions, no frantic pleas for negotiation or reprieve. Alcestis, with an air of profound composure, merely rose from her position, bestowed a tender, final kiss upon her beloved husband, and then departed alongside the embodiment of death with a natural grace, as if embarking upon a routine visit to a nearby acquaintance. Instantaneously, Admetus experienced a complete restoration of his health and vitality. Apollo's divine endowment functioned precisely according to its sacred pledge. The very instant Alcestis drew her last breath, his debilitating malady dissipated entirely, and his robust vigor surged back. Yet this extraordinary survival bore no resemblance to a triumphant achievement. He was indeed alive, but at an immeasurable personal cost that rendered his continued existence nearly insufferable. The populace of Fire plunged into a period of profound lamentation for Alcestis, a collective sorrow unprecedented in its depth and intensity. Her demise was not a consequence of an unfortunate mishap, a debilitating sickness, or the gradual decay of advanced age. Instead, she had succumbed to the boundless power of love, offering herself as the ultimate sacrifice for the welfare of her cherished family and the prosperity of her sovereign domain. Her solemn funeral rites thus transformed into an eloquent homage to the most exalted moral excellences attainable by humankind. However, the narrative of this extraordinary devotion did not conclude with Alcestis's passing. In stark contrast to Sisyphus's isolated and cunning contention against insurmountable cosmic powers, Alcestis's unparalleled self-immolation profoundly resonated within the sensibilities of both divine beings and mortal men. Her profoundly altruistic deed generated repercussions that extended far beyond the immediate confines of her familial circle. Intelligence regarding her monumental action reached the ears of Heracles, the celebrated demigod and hero, who happened to be traversing the region of Pherae en route to fulfilling one of his renowned heroic exploits. Upon his arrival at Admetus's palatial residence, he discovered his venerable comrade, steeped in a profound state of sorrow, attending to his visitors with a practiced but utterly lifeless civility, while his spirit was unmistakably shattered by grief. Heracles, a legendary figure who had confronted formidable beasts, defied Olympian deities, and surmounted seemingly insurmountable trials, found his formidable spirit deeply stirred by the poignant account of Alcestis's ultimate offering. Here, he recognized, was an individual who had vanquished the dominion of death, not through raw physical might or ingenious intellect, but through the unadulterated force of unconditional love. Shabloli. It struck him as fundamentally unjust that such a profound triumph should culminate in such a devastating sorrow. Consequently, Heracles arrived at a momentous resolution, a course of action that would have appeared utterly inconceivable to anyone familiar solely with the narrative of Sisyphus's futile endeavors. He determined to engage in a direct physical confrontation with Thanatos himself and forcibly reclaim that which the Grim Reaper had asserted as his rightful possession. The titanic confrontation between Heracles and the spectral entity of Thanatos unfolded within the ethereal twilight, existing between the boundaries of vitality and demise, in an arcane dominion where corporeal might held less sway than the indomitable power of volition. Heracles engaged in this epic struggle not for his own individual aggrandizement, nor for the pursuit of renown or any self-serving advantage, but rather for the fundamental tenet that a love as profound and selfless as Alcestis's should not remain unacknowledged or uncompensated. And against all rational expectation, in a manner deemed unfathomable, he emerged victorious. His triumph was achieved not through cunning deception or exploitation of intricate rules, but through an unwavering tenacity propelled by an unshakable ethical certitude. Thanatos, confronted by an adversary whose sole motivation was the purest form of affection rather than personal benefit, discovered himself utterly incapable of retaining his hold upon the ethereal essence of Alcestis's soul. When Heracles successfully reinstated Alcestis to the realm of the living and into the fervent embrace of her husband, this act epitomized a fundamentally distinct form of conquest over mortality compared to Sisyphus's earlier exploits. Whereas Sisyphus had endeavored to circumvent the inevitable by means of astute cunning and intricate schemes, Alcestis had embraced her destiny through an act of supreme devotion, and this profound affection, as it ultimately transpired, proved to be a force more potent than either intellectual ingenuity or the inexorable grasp of death itself. The poignant reunification of Alcestis and Admetus swiftly attained legendary status across the entirety of Greece, though not in the manner one might initially anticipate. It was not commemorated as a mere victory of formidable heroic might or an arbitrary instance of celestial intervention. Instead, it was perpetually enshrined in memory as incontrovertible evidence that authentic self-abnegation and profound love engender their own unique and formidable potency, an inherent strength that even the formidable entity of death is compelled to acknowledge and honor. As the tranquil twilight descends upon the venerable palace of Pheres, with Alcestis and Admetus observing their progeny engaged in joyful recreation within the sun-drenched courtyard, one might pause to contemplate the stark divergence between this narrative and the somber chronicle of Sisyphus. Both accounts feature mortal beings daring to contend with the ultimate finality of death, yet they employ fundamentally antithetical methodologies. Sisyphus sought to outwit mortality through an exercise of individual intellectual prowess, perceiving it as an intricate conundrum to be untangled by means of superior cunning. Alcestis, conversely, willingly accepted death through an act of profound devotion, interpreting it as a selfless offering capable of serving a more transcendent objective. One distinct approach culminated in perpetual retribution. The other culminated in miraculous revitalization and enduring felicity. Having witnessed the extraordinary manner in which profound affection triumphed over the inevitability of death in the compelling saga of Alcestis, our attention now shifts to an examination of an entirely different strategy for confronting the seemingly insurmountable, an approach that places its conviction not in the intellectual artifice characteristic of Sisyphus, nor in the ultimate self-abnegation exemplified by Alcestis, but rather in the unadulterated, transformative potency of artistic expression and melodic harmony. Envision, if you will, the verdant, undulating terrain of Thrace in the northern reaches of Greece, a land where the most exquisite and ethereal music known to humankind reverberates serenely across the expansive valleys. This celestial auditory tapestry emanates from Orpheus, the illustrious progeny of the muse Calliope, and widely acclaimed as the most accomplished and gifted minstrel to have ever graced the mortal coil. When Orpheus delicately plucks the strings of his lyre and pours forth his captivating vocalizations, even the most untamed creatures of the wilderness spontaneously convene in tranquil communion to absorb his artistry. Majestic arboreal giants are said to wrench themselves from their deep-seated roots, compelled to draw nearer to the irresistible allure of his compositions. Indeed, it is recounted that even inanimate stones shed crystalline tears, moved by the sheer, ineffable splendor of his melodic creations. Yet, on this particular evening, the picturesque hills of Thrace are enveloped in an oppressive stillness, a stark contrast to their usual musical vibrancy. Orpheus is discovered seated in profound sorrow beside a freshly dug grave, his cherished lyre resting inert in his lap, his gaze fixed upon the hallowed earth that now enshrouds his dearly beloved wife, Eurydice. This pervasive quietude feels infinitely more weighty and significant than any melodic masterpiece he has ever conceived, for it embodies the agonizing void left by the absence of the singular individual whose voice he adored above all others, even his own. Eurydice had met her untimely end on the very day of their nuptials, not succumbing to the ravages of disease or the gradual decay of advanced age, but rather falling victim to a venomous serpent's bite as she desperately sought to elude the unwelcome overtures of another man. The calamity was abrupt, utterly devoid of reason, and devastatingly absolute. In one fleeting instant, she was observed radiating pure delight, her laughter echoing amidst the festivities of their wedding banquet. In the subsequent moment, she had vanished irrevocably, abandoning Orpheus to the desolate company of his unparalleled musical gift and his crushing sorrow. For numerous days, Orpheus had strenuously endeavored to give voice to his anguish through song, striving to discover a melodic line capable of encapsulating the profound depth of his emotional torment. However, each attempt at musical expression invariably transformed into a threnody so utterly soul-shattering that even he, the master musician, found himself unable to endure its continuation. The very music that once imparted boundless delight to all who listened now served only to intensely magnify the crushing weight of his personal sorrow. As he lingered in the encroaching gloom, Orpheus arrived at a monumental decision, a perilous undertaking that would either utterly obliterate his spirit or miraculously accomplish the seemingly unattainable. He resolved to embark upon a journey unprecedented for any living mortal. He would descend into the chilling depths of the underworld and directly petition Hades, the formidable sovereign of the dead, for the restoration of his cherished wife to the realm of existence. In stark divergence from Sisyphus, who meticulously devised intricate plots and cunning stratagems to evade his own inescapable mortality, Orpheus harbored no intention of employing deceit or artifice against any entity. Furthermore, unlike Alcestis, he was not poised to offer his own life as the ultimate sacrifice in the name of love. His proposed course of action was notably more straightforward, yet arguably more daring than either of the preceding approaches. He intended to perform his sublime melodies for the chthonic deities of the departed, nurturing the profound hope that the inherent power of music could achieve what brute force and astute intellect decidedly could not. The perilous expedition into the abyssal underworld commenced at one of the designated access points to the tenebrous domain of the deceased, specifically a cavern nestled deep within the craggy mountains, where the encroaching gloom appeared to descend into depths far exceeding any natural subterranean cavity. Orpheus, with resolute steps, ventured forth into this profound obscurity, his only companion his cherished lyre, meticulously traversing arcane pathways that the feet of the living were unequivocally never intended to tread. The initial formidable obstacle he encountered was Charon, the ancient and stoic ferryman responsible for conveying souls across the somber waters of the river Styx. Charon adhered to a set of unyielding and straightforward regulations. Only the departed were permitted passage across the infernal river, and they were, moreover, obligated to tender the appropriate funerary coin as payment for the transit. Orpheus, demonstrably alive and breathing, possessed no such obols for the required fare. "Retreat from this place," Charon commanded him, his voice resonating with the desolate, abrasive quality of water ceaselessly eroding stone. "Those who yet draw breath possess no legitimate purpose or rightful claim within the hallowed dominion of the deceased." Rather than engaging in verbal disputes or attempting to negotiate terms, Orpheus spontaneously commenced a melodic outpouring. His composition wove an intricate tapestry illustrating the profound essence of affection. This was not solely a testament to his personal devotion for Eurydice, but an expansive ode to love in all its myriad manifestations. The deep-seated bond shared by mothers and their offspring, the unwavering loyalty of companions who brave adversity together, and the inherent appreciation mortals hold for the exquisite world into which they are born and from which they must, in due course, depart. As his voice resonated, an extraordinary phenomenon unfolded. Charon, the venerable ferryman who had silently conveyed countless souls across the river Styx for untold millennia, found an unfamiliar moisture tracing paths down his ancient visage. The song did not employ guile or persuade him to violate established protocols. Instead, it stirred him to such an profound emotional depth that he found himself utterly incapable of denying passage to the gifted minstrel. "Favor me with your song once more upon your return," Charon murmured softly as Orpheus stepped aboard his vessel. "The very memory of beauty's sound has long since eluded me." This identical pattern of musical persuasion recurred as Orpheus ventured deeper into the abyssal reaches of the underworld. Each formidable guardian, every daunting impediment, each supernatural trial was surmounted not through brute force or deceptive stratagems, but by the compelling, irresistible potency of his melodies. Cerberus, the formidable three-headed hound assigned to guard the very gates of Hades, gracefully reclined and closed all six of his vigilant eyes as Orpheus serenaded him with a soothing lullaby, speaking of the tranquil repose that follows a day of dedicated service. The canine's trio of mouths, which had instilled terror in innumerable departed spirits, curved into an expression that bore an uncanny resemblance to a gentle smile. The Furies, those fearsome goddesses of retribution who ceaselessly hounded the guilty, momentarily suspended their eternal pursuit to absorb a ballad about absolution and atonement. For the first time in their ageless existence, they experienced an emotion distinctly different from wrath. Even the tormented souls within the underworld found a temporary respite from their ceaseless punishments. Tantalus, forever condemned to reach for sustenance and hydration that perpetually receded from his grasp, forgot his gnawing hunger and unquenchable thirst while enraptured by Orpheus's harmonious strains. Sisyphus, perpetually pushing his immense boulder up the arduous incline, paused in his unending toil, allowing the colossal stone to rest, while he immersed himself in the sheer splendor of the music. Tidings of the living musician swiftly permeated the underworld. Spirits began to congregate along Orpheus's trajectory, irresistibly drawn by the music that stirred vivid recollections of all the exquisite things they had relinquished in the mortal coil. The somber dominion of the deceased had never before been graced by such unparalleled compositions. Ultimately, Orpheus arrived at the majestic throne room of Hades and Persephone, the august king and queen who presided over the dead. This was the very court that Sisyphus had once outwitted with his intricate bureaucratic cunning. These were the same formidable powers that Alcestis had approached through an act of selfless immolation. Yet Orpheus presented himself before them through the sheer, unadulterated essence of artistic expression. Standing humbly before the twin thrones, Orpheus embarked upon his most momentous performance. He sang of Eurydice, not merely lamenting her loss, but celebrating the profound depth of his affection for her. He vocalized about the infectious way she chuckled at his jests, even those of a rather poor quality, about her habit of humming along whenever he played, never quite in perfect tune, yet always with an unbridled effervescence, about the manner in which she regarded the world with an insatiable curiosity and an innate benevolence. But, transcending these personal recollections, he sang of love itself as an intrinsic shaping force within the cosmos. He articulated how love begets beauty, stimulates burgeoning growth, and inextricably links all sentient beings. He lamented the grievous tragedy of love prematurely severed, and the lamentable squandering of beauty extinguished before its destined hour. As his voice soared, an event of unparalleled significance transpired within the grim throne room of the departed. Persephone, the regal queen of the underworld, began to weep. These were not tears born of sorrow, but rather tears of profound recognition. She vividly recalled her own poignant love story, her own wrenching separation from the vibrant, growing world above. Even Hades, the austere and unyielding deity of the dead, who had borne witness to every conceivable form of mortal anguish, found himself profoundly affected. He had observed innumerable tragedies unfold, yet he had never before heard them transmuted into such breathtaking artistry. The music did not deny the stark reality of death, nor attempt to logically refute its existence. Instead, it eloquently demonstrated how love possesses the singular capacity to forge profound meaning even in the inescapable presence of loss. When the final notes of the song faded, an extended silence enveloped the throne room. Then Hades spoke, his voice imbued with a gentleness it had not possessed for eons. "Orpheus," he pronounced, "your melodic artistry has achieved something I would have deemed utterly impossible. You have infused the very realm of death with beauty, and in doing so, you have reminded us that death itself can possess a certain aesthetic grace when it is intricately woven into a grander narrative of love." Persephone leaned forward from her majestic throne. "We shall restore Eurydice to your keeping," she declared. "Your profound affection for her, so eloquently expressed through your magnificent art, has unequivocally proven itself stronger than death itself." Orpheus could scarcely comprehend the words he was hearing. Where Sisyphus's intricate cleverness ultimately proved futile, and Alcestis's courageous sacrifice necessitated divine intercession to succeed, his music had accomplished the impossible through its intrinsic, unassisted power. However, Hades then raised a commanding hand. "There is one crucial condition," he stated, and suddenly Orpheus felt the immense burden of divine stricture descend upon his moment of triumph. "Eurydice will follow you back to the domain of the living, but you absolutely must not cast a backward glance at her until you both have entirely exited our realm. Should you turn to behold her before reaching the surface, she will be irrevocably lost to you forever." It was a stipulation that simultaneously made perfect logical sense and no sense whatsoever. Why would the omnipotent deities bestow such a miraculous boon only to encumber it with such a formidable restriction? Yet, Orpheus offered no protest. He had journeyed too far and achieved too much to imperil everything with mere inquiries. Now, the arduous journey back to the terrestrial surface commenced. Imbued with a newfound joy and fervent hope, Orpheus could distinctly discern Eurydice's light footsteps trailing behind him. He could sense her ethereal presence accompanying him up the shadowed pathways toward the realm of life. They passed all the locations where his enchanting music had worked its profound magic on their descent. Cerberus remained peacefully slumbering. The Furies were still quiescent, the tormented souls still experiencing a reprieve from their endless labors. But as they ascended higher, drawing nearer to the tenuous boundary between death and life, an insidious doubt began to insinuate itself into Orpheus's consciousness. He could not detect Eurydice's gentle breathing. He could not hear her voice. What if the gods had cunningly deceived him? What if he was merely walking alone, under the deluded impression that he had been reunited with his beloved wife, when in actuality she remained hopelessly ensnared below. The insidious doubt intensified with every single step. He found himself straining every faculty to catch any sound that would unequivocally confirm her actual presence. A faint rustle of clothing, a soft sigh, even the whisper of tears, anything that would serve as irrefutable proof that he had not been tricked. Finally, just mere paces from the surface, mere moments away from successfully concluding the seemingly impossible journey, Orpheus's resolve fractured. He impulsively turned around to gaze upon Eurydice, needing to verify with his own eyes that she was truly corporeal, that his triumph was absolutely genuine. And there she stood, beautiful, sorrowful, already beginning to etherealize. As the divine condition took immediate effect, she extended a spectral hand to caress his face one final time, her fingers passing through his skin like an ephemeral mist. "Why?" she breathed, her voice a mere wisp, and then she was utterly gone, irresistibly drawn back into the abyssal depths by forces far more potent than love or music. Orpheus desperately attempted to follow her back down, but the pathways that had previously opened for him were now irrevocably sealed. His music, which had effortlessly vanquished every impediment on his initial journey, was powerless to forge a second passage to the land of the deceased. The gods had granted him a singular miracle, and his own inherent doubt had tragically nullified it. He emerged into the comforting sunlight utterly alone, burdened by the crushing realization that he had come closer than any mortal to conquering death, and that his own profound human frailty had snatched defeat from the very jaws of victory. For the remainder of his mortal existence, Orpheus traversed the world, creating music that was more exquisitely beautiful and profoundly heartbreaking than any melodies ever heard before or since. His compositions narrated the epic tale of his arduous journey to the underworld, of a love that very nearly triumphed over death, and of the inherent human propensity to sabotage our most magnificent victories through the insidious influences of doubt and fear. Yet perhaps the genuine triumph of Orpheus resides not in the fleeting reunion with Eurydice. It is, rather, the enduring music itself. His poignant songs about profound love and devastating loss continue to resonate deeply with people long after his own demise. In a profound sense, his artistry ultimately achieved what his personal odyssey could not. It forged something enduringly beautiful and meaningful from profound tragedy, something that continues to touch other hearts and offer solace to those confronting their own personal losses. Our exploration through the myriad strategies mortals have employed to challenge death now brings us, at last, to the most unreservedly direct approach of all, the simple act of overwhelming death through sheer physical might and unyielding resolve. This formidable method is epitomized by Heracles, arguably the greatest hero of ancient Greece, whose climactic confrontation with Thanatos represents the ultimate crucible for testing mortal determination against an inherent cosmic force. Envision yourself amidst the rolling hills just outside Pheræ, where we last observed Alcestis and Admetus living contentedly after her miraculous resurrection from the clutches of death. However, we must momentarily rewind the chronological tapestry to the precise juncture when Heracles first became aware of Alcestis's extraordinary sacrifice and determined that such unparalleled devotion should not go unrewarded. Heracles made his arrival at the stately palace of Admetus in the late afternoon, his form cloaked in dust from his extensive travels, anticipating the warm hospitality of an old acquaintance. He was in a period between his legendary labors, having only recently concluded the arduous capture of the Erymanthian boar, and preparing himself for his next seemingly insurmountable task. These brief interludes between his monumental challenges were exceptionally precious to him, moments when he could almost experience the sensation of being an ordinary individual rather than a hero eternally condemned to validate his worth through an unending succession of trials. Yet, upon reaching the palace, an unsettling sensation pervaded his senses. The customary vibrant sounds of a thriving court were noticeably hushed. Servants moved with a quiet solemnity, communicating in hushed tones. The entire atmosphere was palpably heavy with an unspoken sorrow, although Heracles could not immediately ascertain the specific cause of this profound grief. Upon Heracles' arrival at the royal residence, Admetus greeted him at the threshold, an encounter that immediately struck the hero with profound concern regarding his friend's altered visage. The sovereign appeared to have aged considerably, as if years had etched themselves onto his countenance during the mere month that had elapsed since their last meeting. His face was visibly emaciated, his eyes swollen and reddened from incessant weeping, and his movements suggested a man burdened by an overwhelming, invisible weight, struggling beneath an insufferable sorrow. "My esteemed companion," Heracles inquired, his voice laced with apprehension, "what calamitous event has transpired within these halls?" Admetus found himself grappling for an appropriate response, his words caught in the vice of an unspeakable anguish. How could one articulate to another the harrowing truth that his beloved wife had willingly offered her life to preserve his own? How could he adequately convey the peculiar, agonizing quality of grief that stems from surviving at the ultimate expense of another's demise? "A profound bereavement has occurred," Admetus eventually managed to utter, his voice strained. "A truly dreadful loss, but I implore you, as my honored guest, let us divert our conversation to more agreeable subjects." In strict observance of the revered customs of Greek hospitality, Admetus endeavored to conceal the depth of his sorrow and ensure his visitor received proper entertainment. Consequently, a lavish banquet was prepared, fine wines were generously poured, and musicians were summoned to play. Though their melodies, devoid of genuine spirit, resonated with a forced and joyless quality that permeated the atmosphere. Heracles, discerning the profound distress afflicting his friend, but respectfully acknowledging his desire for privacy, initially sought to alleviate the somber mood by recounting tales of his recent heroic escapades and formidable adventures. Yet, the unvarnished truth was destined to emerge. Eventually, one of the palace servants, deeply touched by Heracles' genuine compassion and evident concern, divulged the complete and poignant narrative of Alcestis' extraordinary sacrifice, how she had unhesitatingly embraced death to safeguard her husband's existence, how she had departed with death himself with a remarkable serenity, as if merely embarking on a casual visit to a neighboring acquaintance, and how the entire royal household had been enveloped in a pall of profound mourning ever since that fateful day. When the full import of these events dawned upon Heracles, his reaction was both instantaneous and intensely visceral. This was not merely the sorrowful regret for the passing of a virtuous woman. It was an ignited fury at the sheer injustice of the situation. Alcestis, in her unparalleled act, embodied the pinnacle of human nobility: boundless love, selfless sacrifice, unwavering loyalty, and indomitable courage. The notion that such an exemplary individual should be claimed by death, while countless individuals characterized by cruelty and selfishness continued to enjoy protracted lives, struck Heracles as a fundamental and intolerable perversion of cosmic order. "Where, pray tell, is she interred?" He pressed the servant, his voice taut with indignation. "She is not, my lord," the servant replied, his voice hushed, but death came for her personally, and as she walked with him, her physical form simply dissipated, fading into nothingness. There was no corporeal remnant left to consecrate with a burial. This chilling detail served only to inflame Heracles' anger further. Not only had death prematurely claimed a woman of exceptional goodness, but he had also cruelly denied her family the solace and closure afforded by proper funerary rites. It was an egregious insult, compounded upon an already unbearable tragedy. In that moment, Heracles forged a resolution that would appear utterly unattainable to anyone who had not dedicated years to achieving the seemingly impossible. He determined to track down Thanatos, the very personification of death, and forcibly reclaim what this grim deity had stolen. Unlike Sisyphus, who relied on elaborate cunning and deceptive stratagems, or Orpheus, who sought to sway the underworld with the enchanting power of his music, Heracles intended to employ his preeminent attributes, his colossal physical might, and his unyielding, absolute refusal to countenance defeat. His audacious plan was to engage death itself in a brutal wrestling match and subdue the primordial force into submission. The initial, formidable hurdle proved to be the very act of locating Thanatos. Death, it was widely known, possessed no fixed abode nor maintained any predictable schedule of regular office hours. He manifested only precisely when and where an individual's appointed time had arrived, then swiftly vanished to attend to the next inexorable appointment on his ceaseless itinerary. However, Heracles, through the crucible of his multitudinous labors, had acquired an unparalleled proficiency in tracking entities that actively sought to remain elusive. He meticulously followed the subtle, ominous signs that invariably marked death's passage through the mortal realm, places where vibrant flora inexplicably withered without apparent cause, areas where animals grew agitated and restless, and where the joyful chorus of birds abruptly fell silent. Death's very presence left a distinct, almost spiritual imprint, a spectral footprint that Heracles, with his extraordinarily heightened senses, was uniquely capable of detecting. The ethereal trail ultimately guided him to a desolate crossroads situated just beyond the city's perimeter, a convergence point where several ancient paths intersected beneath the spreading canopy of a venerable olive tree. This particular locale was renowned as one of the traditional thresholds, where death habitually revealed himself to mortals whose final hour had struck, a liminal, neutral territory existing between the vibrant realm of life and the somber dominion of death, between the tangible mortal world and the enigmatic beyond. As the evening shadows lengthened and twilight began to descend, Heracles positioned himself beneath the ancient olive tree, patiently awaiting his quarry. His vigil was not protracted. As the last vestiges of daylight receded from the sky, a towering cloaked figure materialized from the deepening shadows, emanating an unmistakable aura of ultimate, chilling authority. "Thanatos," Heracles declared, rising deliberately to his full, imposing height. "Heracles," Death responded, his voice ancient and resonant, betraying no hint of surprise at their unexpected confrontation. "I have been anticipating your arrival." "Then you are fully aware of the purpose that brings me here," Heracles asserted. "You desire my return of Alcestis to the land of the living. But such is not the immutable nature of death, hero," Thanatos countered, his tone devoid of emotion. "I do not relinquish that which I have irrevocably claimed." "We shall indeed ascertain the veracity of that statement," Heracles retorted, and with a surge of formidable power, he launched himself directly at the deity of death. The ensuing confrontation was an event utterly unprecedented in the annals of mortal experience. It transcended mere physical combat, though Heracles undeniably deployed every ounce of his legendary, prodigious strength. It was, at its very core, a profound contest between the fundamental, opposing forces of life and death, manifesting through the violent clash of two beings who each represented the ultimate, unadulterated expression of their respective cosmic powers. Thanatos fought with the inexorable, relentless might of ultimate cessation, of entropy, embodying the primordial force that inexorably guides all things to their inevitable conclusion. His chilling touch possessed the power to drain vitality. His very presence could instill an overwhelming sense of despair, and his eternal existence served as a stark, ever-present reminder of the inherent futility of all mortal endeavor and struggle. However, Heracles countered with a force equally potent, the unyielding human refusal to accept the unacceptable, to capitulate in the face of injustice. He embodied not solely brute physical prowess, but the profound moral fortitude that compels individuals to challenge perceived wrongdoing, even when confronted with insurmountable odds. His extraordinary power emanated not merely from his formidable musculature, but from an absolute, unshakable conviction that certain principles were unequivocally worth fighting for, irrespective of any potential consequences. The ferocious struggle raged unabated throughout the long, dark hours of the night. They grappled with titanic force beneath the venerable olive tree, their violent combat causing the very earth to tremble and the surrounding air to shimmer visibly with the raw, unleashed energy of their clash. At various junctures, Thanatos appeared to gain the undeniable advantage, and Heracles could distinctly feel his prodigious strength ebbing away, his very life force being inexorably drawn towards the chilling void that death personified. Yet each time he teetered on the precipice of utter defeat, Heracles conjured vivid images of Alcestis, her quiet, unwavering courage, her selfless, willing sacrifice, her profound love for her cherished family. He contemplated Admetus's raw, agonizing grief and the inherent injustice of virtuous individuals being made to suffer so profoundly. While the cosmic order often remained utterly indifferent to individual pain and sorrow, these powerful thoughts ignited within him a renewed vigor, a strength that transcended mere physical capability. He was not merely battling for his own existence, nor merely striving to assert his personal power. He was fighting for the fundamental principle that love and goodness ought to possess intrinsic value within the universe, that death should not be permitted to claim the most exemplary among humanity without a fierce, unyielding contest. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Heracles decisively gained the upper hand in the monumental struggle. His formidable grip on Thanatos tightened relentlessly, and for the very first time in the god's eternal existence, Death himself found his inexorable power being overcome by the sheer, indomitable will of a mere mortal. "Release her," Heracles demanded, his powerful hands locked immovably around Thanatos' spectral throat. "I cannot," Death gasped, his voice a strained whisper. "The established rules forbid it." "Then we shall simply shatter those rules," Heracles declared with unwavering resolve, applying even greater pressure. "Some imperatives are far more profound and significant than any mere set of regulations." And in that extraordinary, pivotal moment, something truly unprecedented occurred. Thanatos, confronted by a mortal whose conviction proved more potent and unyielding than even cosmic law itself, made a choice that astonished both combatants. He yielded. This capitulation was not a result of physical annihilation, for gods, by their very nature, cannot be truly destroyed by mortal strength. Rather, it was because Heracles had unequivocally demonstrated a force that even death, in its eternal dominion, was compelled to acknowledge and respect: the unparalleled power of absolute moral commitment. The hero's unshakable willingness to directly challenge the fundamental order of existence for the paramount ideals of love and justice forged a unique, transcendent form of authority, one that utterly superseded conventional rules and cosmic decrees. "Very well," Thanatos conceded, his voice grudging, as Heracles finally released his vice-like grip. "But be unequivocally clear on this. This act does not establish a precedent. This is a solitary, one-time exception, granted for a singular, unparalleled situation. Alcestis's sacrifice was of such unblemished purity, and your unwavering commitment to honoring it is so utterly complete, that the normal cosmic order must, for this instance, bend to acknowledge such extraordinary virtue." With a gesture that visibly cost him considerable effort, Thanatos reached into the shadowy folds of his voluminous cloak, and with a spectral motion, withdrew a figure, Alcestis herself, pale and ethereal, yet unmistakably alive. She gazed around in profound confusion, as if slowly awakening from a deep, bewildering dream. "How?" she began, her voice faint. "Someone fought for you," Heracles gently explained, his tone reassuring. "Someone profoundly decided that your supreme sacrifice deserved to be honored with an equally profound and resolute sacrifice." As the radiant sun ascended over the ancient crossroads, Heracles tenderly escorted Alcestis back to the city of Pherae, where her miraculous reunion with Admetus swiftly became the enduring stuff of timeless legend. Yet the true magnitude of this victory extended far beyond the mere return of one virtuous woman to the realm of the living. It was, more significantly, the profound demonstration that unwavering moral conviction, when resolutely supported by the courage and willingness to act upon that conviction, can, on occasion, achieve what is otherwise deemed utterly impossible. The epic tale of Heracles wrestling with death rapidly disseminated throughout the length and breadth of Greece, but it was interpreted and understood in subtly different ways by various segments of the populace. Some perceived it as irrefutable proof that the greatest heroes, through sheer, unyielding determination, possessed the capacity to surmount any conceivable obstacle. Others interpreted it as a testament to the idea that even the omnipotent gods, despite their immense power, held a deep respect for mortals who embodied the highest and most noble virtues. However, perhaps the most profound and significant lesson embedded within the narrative was far more nuanced. Heracles did not triumph over death through superior physical power alone. His victory was ultimately secured because his cause was unequivocally just, and his commitment to it was absolute and unwavering. He fought not for any personal gain or self-aggrandizement, but purely for a higher principle. He risked his very existence not to save himself, but to honor the extraordinary sacrifice of another. This distinctive approach stands in stark contrast to all other known methods mortals had previously employed to challenge the dominion of death. Sisyphus famously relied on cunning and deceptive trickery, but his endeavors served solely his own self-serving interests. Alcestis achieved her defiance through the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, but she paid the supreme, irreversible price. Orpheus utilized the transcendent power of his art and music, yet he was ultimately defeated by his own inherent doubt and lack of faith. Heracles, conversely, triumphed through sheer moral strength, the profound conviction that some principles were intrinsically worth fighting for, irrespective of the overwhelming odds, coupled with the unwavering willingness to actively back that conviction with decisive action. His victory was not merely a personal triumph. It served as a resounding affirmation of the intrinsic value of virtue itself, even in a vast, indifferent universe that often appears to disregard individual worth. As this comprehensive exploration of narratives featuring mortals confronting the ultimate adversary, death, draws to its conclusion, we have observed a spectrum of distinct methodologies: intellectual cunning, selfless devotion, artistic expression, and unwavering ethical resolve. Each of these distinct approaches holds inherent value, demonstrating its capacity to yield extraordinary accomplishments, yet each was invariably met with its own inherent constraints and insurmountable barriers. However, the profound revelation gleaned from these tales may not reside in discerning the superior method. Instead, it seems to underscore the indomitable human spirit's categorical rejection of the notion that any obstacle is genuinely insurmountable. This innate compulsion to press against the very edges of perceived limitations, even when the specter of certain defeat looms large, emerges as the central theme. Whether manifested through Sisyphus's intricate deceptions, Alcestis's profound marital affection, Orpheus's enchanting melodies, or Heracles's formidable physical prowess, humanity consistently endeavors to transgress the very confines of existence itself. And in a profound sense, this steadfast refusal to acquiesce to perceived boundaries, this persistent aspiration for an improved reality, an augmented state, a realm transcending what appears feasible, conceivably represents the quintessential human trait. Occasionally, the most significant triumphs are not forged in the crucible of overcoming overwhelming odds, but rather in the sheer audacity and fortitude to make the attempt, regardless of the daunting probability. Indeed, every monumental human accomplishment, every paradigm-shifting innovation, originated with an individual prepared to exert their will against the colossal weight of impossibility, irrespective of whether that metaphorical boulder ultimately receded or rolled back down.